Come on. Okay, take two. Apologies for the technical issues we had. I had to restart the stream. There were some technical issues. For some reason, it thought I had three or four streams pending because I had some issues last night as well. So we were talking about Paul Pogba and his departure, his pending departure from Manchester United, and he's obviously had two spells, Paul Pogba, at Manchester United. Obviously, he came there initially when he was 16 years old from the French league system as a raw talented youngster when Alex Ferguson was still manager. Now, he only played 7 times, I believe, for the senior side before Juventus come in and snap him up, and he goes over to Serie A and he plays in the Italian league. And debate about that what you will. The rest is history, that kind of thing. Wins loads of titles in Serie A, but you have to remember the Juventus team he was playing in. Well, there were other players who were quite dominant, and therefore his frailties and deficiencies in the game he could get away with a bit more. And if you ask any Juventus fan or anyone you know who follows Italian football, what their viewpoint on Paul Pogba is if they've watched the Italian game, they would say he's talented but seriously lazy, and his attitude could be a problem. So when he re-signs for his record fee of 83 million, which is actually more than what they paid for Harry Maguire, by the way, and at the time was a record fee, which has since been surpassed by Gareth Bale's transfer to Real Madrid, for example, and Neymar and Mbappe's initial transfer fees, and Dembele's and all that. When you look at what's happened over the last 6 years in Man United, since he first was there as a youngster, he hasn't won much silverware. While he's played in 4 cup finals, including 2 European finals, an FA Cup final, and a League Cup final, winning 2 out of the 4 trophies he's competed for, you do have to ask the question, has it worked out? What's gone wrong? Look at it this way. Van Gaal did not have his contract extended, so you can look at that as a sacking. Was it a mutual parting of the ways? Mourinho gets sacked. Solskjaer gets sacked. Rangnick is only given an interim tag and technically doesn't take up his consultancy role. So think of it that way. Apart from Ferguson, who remained manager after Pogba left and wasn't manager when he returned, the 4 other managers he's played for are no longer involved with the club. And officially 2 of them did get sacked. So make of that what you will. And yeah, I think that the situation surrounding Pogba and his departure, it's been an unhappy union between player and club for a long time. The size of contract, the size of the transfer fee, is problematic. He's not the first player to sign a big deal or a big contract where it hasn't worked out in pro sports. He won't be the last. There's a couple of other players right now who are on big money, who've signed big contracts, who are not fulfilling their potential in the sports that they play. I think that's a fair assessment. And the Pogba situation, it's difficult. There is no doubt that he has the ability and the talent and the skill set. It's his attitude, and his fitness has been questioned as well. He's missed a lot of games when he's not been fit. A lot of games this season, a lot of games last season. Fitness has definitely been an issue with Pogba. Attitude's been an issue with Pogba, and a discussion point with Paul Pogba. Oh, don't lag. And it's gone slow again. Why is my internet being slow? But yes, so Paul Pogba is a bit of an enigma. If you're a neutral looking at it, and as I tried to describe in the last stream before we had some issues with the tech failing, and as I described in the video where I've done a video earlier where I discuss his departure from the club, and I discuss his period of time at the club, and you know, distant enough. He's an overpriced Mesut Ozil. There you go. Mesut Ozil could not be consistent enough, but at least with Mesut Ozil, while he would disappear in games and wouldn't necessarily be as effective as he could be, Mesut Ozil, I think Arsenal got more value for money out of Mesut Ozil. So did Real Madrid, to be fair, than Arsenal, sorry, than Man United have got out of Paul Pogba. Value for money. Um, and Mesut Ozil could have more of an impact when he was playing well on a game and on a team, a club and country, than Paul Pogba. And when people say Pogba plays better for France than he does for Manchester United, A, he's playing less games per season for France or in a calendar year. And B, the system is different. But C, check out Euro 2020. Seriously, check out Euro 2020. He really doesn't. That's again a misnomer. That's not necessarily the case um, with Paul Pogba. There's clearly an attitude issue. There's clearly been issues with his teammates at both club and country, and he's only scored, I think, 39 goals in total in his two spells for the club, like 260 odd games. His return is not what it should be. He should have scored at least double that. I think that would have been a fair return. So his goal scoring ratio is not good enough. He is not consistent enough in his fitness and his attitude and his commitment and the weaknesses in his game. I mean, look, multiple managers have tried to get the best out of him. Somehow he's won a World Cup, but somehow that French team won a World Cup, which proves that the best team doesn't always win the tournament. Which was highlighted in the Euros a couple or last year. That pretty much the same French side that wins the World Cup didn't get past the second round in the Euros and was woeful and not good enough in the Euros last year. And their best player again was Antoine Griezmann. In my opinion, he's France's best player and most consistent player. Another thing that Paul Pogba highlights is the current state of football, in my opinion, when it comes to players and their attitude and their wages, and where I think 20 years ago he would have been out the door quicker. You know, they would have granted transfer request or a Bosman ruling, or he's gone. He's gone quicker. They find a way to move him on. I'm surprised that both United and Pogba have allowed the situation to get to the point where he's allowed to leave on a free transfer. I'm surprised that they didn't try and move him on earlier, about 18 months ago, when it was clear it was not working between him and Solskjaer or him and Mourinho. I think that's possibly put potential buyers off, or potential, new clubs signing him. The potential of the transfer off. His performances at the Euros, I don't think, helped in trying to find him a new home. I do think Man United have actively been trying to move him on for a while. Not worked. It's not worked. And the fact they've drawn out this process and no attempt has been made to extend, or no attempt has been made earlier to move him on. They could have moved him on in January, quite frankly. Obviously, when Ralph Rangnick came in, while they were looking for a permanent replacement for Solskjaer, he obviously said, "Look, I want to work with the players we have here," and that was a disaster, quite frankly. Ralph Rangnick should not have been given the 6-month interim role. Got nothing against Ralph Rangnick. It just didn't work. The players didn't respond to him. Performances got worse. I think Carrick should have been given the job. And the fan base at Man United has been frustrated with the ownership since the day the Glazers announced their intention to buy a majority stake and a controlling stake in the club. It's 18 and a half years of distrust between the the fan base and the ownership and the way that the takeover was completed with other people's money. So it was a leveraged takeover. If Erik ten Hag does not turn things around quickly, even though he needs 3 to 5 years, in my opinion, to completely, you know, transform the dressing room, bring players through the academy. I think Ten Hag, being a former Ajax manager, would definitely focus on the youth policy and looking at the state of the youth system, because Ajax are known for their quality of youth production, much like Man United were in years past, like the class of '92, for example, and the Busby Babes. Historically, Manchester United have had a great youth system that has produced world-class talent for generations, and 50% of the players to play for the club have come through at some point their youth structures. Erik ten Hag, in that sense, is a good fit because of what the culture at Ajax and the culture in Dutch football in general is quite similar, where a high percentage of the players who end up playing for the senior level of Dutch clubs come through their youth systems, and Ajax are the most famous for that, with that style of club structure. So I think with Man United, with Erik ten Hag, it's going to have to be a 3 to 5 year, I wouldn't say project, but process. Process is the way to look at it. Do the owners have patience for that? Now, will the fan base be on board with that? Do they give him that kind of time? They gave Fergie that kind of time back in the 80s and the early 90s to then make him into a monolith. 13 Premier League titles, multiple FA Cups, 2 Champions Leagues, multiple League Cups. Do they give Ten Hag the time they didn't give Van Gaal, Mourinho, and Solskjaer? Because I honestly believe they should have. And time is something that most modern managers don't get. And this is where I think Man City and Liverpool are light years ahead of where Man United are right now, because they gave Klopp time, they gave Guardiola time. And I think Klopp's first season, I think Liverpool finished 10th, and I think Guardiola's first season, they finished 8th. Look where City and Liverpool are compared to Man United. There's your litmus test. Oh, thank you very much. Actually, technically, it's the second live stream we're doing this evening, and technically the fourth in 2 days. We've had a few little technical issues the last couple of days where, for some reason, it's just a bit laggy. So I do appreciate the congratulations. Thank you very, very much. Obviously, officially, the transfer window doesn't officially open yet. Doesn't open for like another couple of days. But already, we're discussing the Paul Pogba situation. We were trying to discuss that on the previous attempt where we had the stream basically crashed and I got frustrated and lots of F-bombs dropped out of my mouth, and I was very close to throwing my laptop out the window and my internet out the window as well. But thankfully, we didn't do that. I appreciate the congratulations. Obviously, the channel's grown quite rapidly in the last couple of weeks. I think having a couple of big European finals and a rugby league final might actually have a little bit to do with that. And of course, in a month's time, the Women's Euros start, so that's something to look forward to next month. And we've got the Commonwealth Games. Obviously, this weekend we've got the Wales playoff match for the World Cup against the winner of Ukraine-Scotland, which looks very likely to be Ukraine this evening, because Scotland are doing their best to lose the game because it's Scotland. So that's going to be quite interesting. What Gareth Bale and Aaron Ramsey will we see at the weekend? Because obviously Aaron Ramsey missed that penalty for Rangers in the Europa League final. Gareth Bale didn't play in the Champions League final. Gareth Bale is also technically like Paul Pogba, a free agent. Could this be Gareth Bale's last hurrah? Is Aaron Ramsey fully fit? That kind of question. And how important they are for Wales. Just have a think how important they are for Wales with the success they've had at the club level of the game. Let's see how they are crucially important, the direction Wales are taking if Wales are to make the World Cup. If Wales fail to make the World Cup, does Gareth Bale just call it quits in his footballing career? England versus New Zealand against tomorrow, a new era. Yes, I find it very interesting. They named Ben Stokes captain before McCullum was named coach. I think McCullum was already agreed as coach before Stokes is named captain. I think that's a PR move by Robert Key, who's obviously the director of cricket, whatever his role is. Robert Key coming into the ECB in his role um, as cricketing director. I think that was a PR move. I think they knew McCullum was going to be their coach, but of course he was, still actively involved in the IPL and things like that. I think they were going to wait for a few things to slot in quite nicely before they named him. But the way that came out, normally you name the coach first, and he goes, "This guy's going to be my captain, my vice captain, my leadership group." So I think they knew McCullum. They already knew McCullum was going to be their coach before. But yes, the one weakness I think, and the one concern I have is McCullum has never coached first class. He's coached the shorter formats of the sport, of the game, the T20 format. Um, but as a player, I liked him as a player at all formats of the game because he thought outside the box as just a player and then as a captain. He was very, very modern in his approach to the game. Sometimes he could be boring as he could be a Jonathan Trott, just block everything, and then other days he would be like AB de Villiers and Kevin Peterson trying to reverse sweep everything over his shoulder. He was very good at reading how a game was going. Do I be defensive today or do I attack today? Or in this session, let's just be sensible, and then in the second or third session, let's explode and catch the bowlers a bit cold. Let's open things up a bit. As a sort of batting side of things, on a captaincy side of things, he could be like that as well. New Zealand are the best Test side in the world for a reason. They are far better than we are right now. I think at the moment, I think New Zealand and England deserve their 5 Test series. I think we've overdone the Ashes. We've oversold that rivalry between England and Australia. I think we've oversaturated it and devalued what the Ashes is. We play each other far too often. But no, I am looking forward to England and New Zealand and keeping an eye on how things are playing out. I'll keep an eye on the scorecard, and I might put the radio on tomorrow and have it in the background on the old radio whilst I'm doing a few bits and pieces. That'd be kind of interesting to listen to on the Test match special. It's been a while since I've listened to cricket on the radio. I prefer cricket on the radio, actually. And I've been to Lords, so I know the layout of the ground and all that. So it will be interesting. I do feel that his lack of first-class coaching experience when it comes to like the county game or the domestic game in New Zealand, for example, is a slight concern for me. But at the same time, he's willing to try new things and he's willing to think outside the box. And he was like that as a player, and he's going to be like that. He's like that as a coach. He's done it even in the shorter formats of the game. He's willing to think outside the box with mixing up the batting lineup, sometimes dropping a big name player for a lesser known player or a younger player, and challenging his players to go. You've got to prove to me in training that you deserve to stay in the side. But he's against rotation, which is important. Whereas Silverwood and his predecessors rotated far too much. Therefore, when you are a player low on confidence and you're trying to either become an upper order batsman or a fast bowler or a middle order batsman or a wicket keeper, constantly chopping and changing does affect a player's confidence. So if you are struggling, just Christ, okay, here's your gear. We'll give you a year. We'll give you 6 months. That comes down to coaching. So I think McCullum will work with those players who are feeling a little bit unsure of themselves, struggling with the bat, struggling with the ball, struggling in the field. I think he will work more. I think he's a player's coach, a more hands-on, man-to-man. Wouldn't shout and scream at his players, but bring him in and say, look, okay, you're struggling here, you're doing well here. Let's try and work on this. Let's not worry about that too much. Relax a little bit. I think he's more of the type of guy you would actually like to have that conversation with down the pub. If you're just a fan, I think he's also a fan of the game. Well, he is a fan of the game. So imagine like if you bump into him at the pub and you're both watching the cricket on the TV, and you're getting a conversation about the good and the bad and the ugly of the game. He will be very good at calmly going, I think this is where they could do better, or this where they're weak. But yes, I think it's a brave appointment, but I think it could turn out to be the right appointment. But if New Zealand batter England, which they have the ability to do because they battered everyone lately, and they are one of the best Test sides in the world, if not the best Test side in the world right now, in my personal opinion, over the last 3-4 years. What I want to see from England is at least show some fight and not celebrate a draw as a win. I want to see a bit more commitment in the field, a bit more fight with the bat. We need to show. I think I was never sold on Joe Root as captain, and while he might have won the most tests as England captain and actually had the most tests as England captain, his win-loss percentage was one of the worst of an England captain ever, if not the worst, for a captain who's captained over, I think, 3 test series or something. There's a minimum amount of tests you have to be on to be classed as the best or worst for win percentage, because some captains have only captained for like a test series and maybe won the test series and have a better win percentage. So there were too many ties in there as captain for Joe Root, and losses and wins was almost even. It was almost a 50-50 win-loss ratio if you take the ties out of things. So it wasn't. It wasn't. People say, "Oh, Joe Root, he's won the most tests as England captain." He also lost the most as well, and had a lower win percentage than a lot of other captains in the game. Oh yeah, look, I mean, there was no acceptance of we're not good enough. There's too many centrally contracted players who are obviously in their contracts. They're not allowed to criticise the ECB or when they're playing shit. Basically, in my opinion, I want to see a player at press conference go, you know what, this is crap. This is not good enough. We need to change. Come on, boys. I want to see some passion from some of the players. The players are too robotic, and when they're interviewed, they're like, Stokesy this and Rooty that. Is like you just put Y or IE on the end of their name to make a nickname. That is painful. Like, stop. Just say, look, I want to. The players are PR coached, media coached to the point where I'd rather gouge my eyes and ears out. There's a lack of passion in interviews from players, and the passion came out with Stuart Broad when he was omitted from the test side, going, what? The West Indies are not playing. Really? I'm not injured. I'm still the. If Jimmy Anderson's not playing, I'm still the best fast bowler. Stuart Broad, that passion came out because he wasn't part of the inner sanctum for that test series. They are so. I want to see the players, sometimes when they are pissed off, just say, yeah, we're not good enough. Or that was fantastic. We did it was a fantastic match. We lost, but and actually be disappointed that they lost a fantastic match, like going close. I want to see players get emotional. You don't see that. They are PR coached to within an inch of their lives, and all that emotion sucked out of them. I like players who get emotional sometimes. It adds a bit of something to it in any sport. Some of these post and pre-match and half-time, or there's a break in play. Let's shove a microphone in. They're like, oh yeah, well, we did this, we did that. Come on, boy. It's just monotone. There's no passion. There's no feel. There's no energy there. It is painful. I think drop the PR people, drop the media, because I think every professional team now and international team will have that media officer who will say you've got 9 interviews and you've got to do the interviews with all the newspapers and all the TV and all that. Get rid of that crap. If the player's going from the dressing room or to the dressing room, or coming off warm up, you go, do you mind if we have a word? That's different. And then you can catch the player and go, you know what, actually, yeah, maybe not at the moment, but I've just finished my warm up. Maybe later I'll give you an interview. That kind of thing, where it's a bit more relaxed and they can be a bit more natural. When you've got that media officer going, come on, lads, you've got to do your official, because they're in contract. They're contracting now where they've got to have their media commitments. If they fail to turn up for their press conferences, they get fined, which I find ridiculous. If the player or the coach is like, we're not in the mood to talk, we're not happy, sorry, but can we discuss this tomorrow or in a couple of days? We'll happily give an interview to all of you guys. We'll happily do a press conference. If you do not turn up for your media commitments, you get sanctioned. We've seen it in clubland. We've seen it international level. We've seen it, and I find that frustrating. I think they need to go, actually, hang on a second. Yes, the TV companies and even YouTube have signed some contracts, and Amazon Prime. The media side of it, the broadcasters, yes, they do sign agreements, but somewhere in that contract, you have to give X amount of interviews per. The coach has to, and players. The captain and another select player has to give a press conference pre and post match. We have to have 100% access. You cannot say, no, not today, lads, we're not having a press conference. This includes when like a player's taken ill, or a player's relative is taken ill or passes away, something else like happens like that. You've got to have the compulsory press conference. I hate that. I hate that. I think the press conferences should be called by the team when they are comfortable to take questions and when they want to dictate when they discuss with the media. The media are still the broadcasters are still getting their and the other journalists are still getting the press conference, but it always has to be on the media's term. Then when the player goes, you know what, we're going to call a press conference now. Okay, it's our time. It's our choice of time of day when we do it. You find out that the press conference select times. It has to be within a certain time slot. No, that should be on the frigging players and the frigging coach to go, right, you know what, today, lads, don't worry about your media commitments today. We're going to have an anti-media day. We're not going to worry about that. Let's focus on training. Let's focus on team bonding or whatever it may be. Or you guys, you can have a day off. Because the media is constantly there. I don't like that. So one of the things I don't like about professional sports is the compulsory media slots and the compulsory press conferences. I mean, I think there needs to be a little bit more relaxed with that, a bit more flexible. And that's done for TV as well. That's done for the 24-hour news cycle to go, okay, we've had the morning press conference, we've got the afternoon press conference. Sometimes there's 3 or 4 press conferences a frigging day that they have to attend, which I find ridiculous. If the players want to talk, let them talk. If the players don't want to talk, don't shove a mic in their face because you will. That's where you get some of these like, and sometimes you notice when the players are sat down, the coaches are sat down for a press conference, they don't want to be there. It's like the compulsory thing you have to do when you're at school or sixth form or at university when you have to do these compulsory things, and then work as well, like your compulsory, health and safety training, even though it's common sense. Don't. Oh look, there's a wet floor. Don't run. Don't run through the puddle. Oh look, there's some stuff on the floor. Move it. It's called these compulsory like things. Don't want to be there. Your heart's not in it. You're bored. You've got to be a little bit more flexible. I think you've got to treat them like human beings rather than robots. Ukraine beating Scotland, I'm not surprised. That's going to be a big game for Wales. I think that's actually an easier game for Wales to play because Ukraine would have had that emotion. The emotional fatigue would be there. If they were playing Scotland, that's a big rivalry match, and the emotion I think would have got too much from them. And Wales had a friendly tonight, which they lost 2-1, but they actually apparently played quite well in their friendly this evening. And they were trying out new combinations and stuff like that. What do you mean? What I'm saying is probably harmful for their mental health, or it's the truth. Like forcing someone to do something they don't want to do is probably not good for them. Like you can tell when how are you using that? Are you saying what I'm saying is bad for them mentally, if or what's currently going on with the constant media is not good because, in my opinion, the what I don't like is the media officer and the PR kind of people are coaching them. They're basically saying, don't say this, don't say that. You're under centralised contract. You can't criticise this. I sometimes like it when like that when Charlie Austin kicked off about VAR. I found that hilarious and also at the same time refreshing because he was being brutally honest. We are frustrated with how the rules of the sport that we play are being governed and implemented. We are waiting. We've been told we've got this technology. Oh yeah, right. Okay, so you're saying the current thing is right. Okay, so you're saying at the moment the current media system we have in place and the right. Yeah, I agree. When Charlie Austin a couple of years ago blew up about the issues with VAR, famously, VAR this, VAR that, and he was going, the officials are not doing very. He got done for bringing the game into disrepute, but I think he was correct in what he was saying. So, and that was a frustrated man going, we are frustrated with the system we currently have, and we're frustrated waiting for the new system to be implemented. Less talk, more action. And he got punished for that. He got punished for bringing the game into disrepute. He got a fine, I think it was like £10,000 for bringing the game into disrepute and criticising the officials or something. Um, and there was, and I remember Adam Pardew. I think it was when the FA Cup they were trialing it before the World Cup or just after the World Cup in 2018 when he was coaching West Brom against Liverpool. I think there was a game, and he was like, "We don't know what's going on," but he was less shouty than Charlie Austin. But he was like, "What's going on here?" And he mentioned that both coaches were like, him and Klopp were both a bit puzzled with some of the decision making and what was actually happening and when you but he was doing it in a different way. But he was still showing his frustration without stepping over that line where there's that official don't bring the game to disrepute. Um, if you look on YouTube, I will say this: the famous, press conference blow-ups, or interview blow-ups, where a player or a coach has just said what they're saying, gone mental, and just got passionate. They are quite funny. Um, not quite at that level, but the Charlie Austin one, he was showing passion, he was showing frustration, and he wasn't, the media officer was like, "Shush, Charlie, don't say this." He was the player that the media were like, "Oh, can we get a word, Charlie, Mr. Charlie Austin? Can we have a words? How do you feel about how the game went?" Because he was involved in the incident where I think the goal got disallowed, or there was a penalty given, or a free kick given against Southampton or something, and he just went, "This is what we're feeling on the field. This is what we're feeling when we're preparing for a game." In regards to, well, what happens if this is what when we review a game, when we're breaking down, and this is the frustrations that I think he spoke for a lot of players and a lot of fans. Now, whether you agree with some of the things he was saying, the frustration is still there with VAR. The VAR frustration is still there, and the footballing authorities need to fix it. With Joe Root, I don't think he was ever the right guy to be captain personally. I said at the time he was appointed, I had some concerns, and people were like, "Oh, no, 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 he's the best batsman we've got." He may be the best batsman we've got, and he might have had a great year with the bat, but he's not a great leader. Um, he doesn't strike me as someone saying, "Come on, lads, roll your sleeves up, fight with me." Um, he may be a very nice guy, and he may be one of the best batsmen in the world, which he is, but oh dear, he doesn't strike me as the passionate type and the leading type. So he was put into a catch-22. There was no one else willing to do it or good enough to do it, possibly. Um, you think in the past being an elite sportsman would be more fun. Today they get paid more, but they're in a goldfish bowl. I wouldn't like that. I think, yeah, some of the passion's been taken out of it. I do think they're overcoached anyway. But the media coaching, especially over the last 15, 20 years, um, the press conferences now, they're less fun. Obviously, like coaches like Jurgen Klopp and Jose Mourinho, you're always going to get those quotes. You're always going to get those Mourinho-isms and those Klopp-isms. Klopp seems to always actually has a pretty wicked sense of humour. Mourinho, I'm the special one. I'm the contented one. Now I'm the boring one. Mourinho, he's had his love-hate relationship with the media. There's a bit of Mourinho, a bit of showmanship with him, but I've noticed when players give interviews now, I've noticed this with the NHL, and I've noticed this with the NRL, and I've noticed this with football, and I've noticed it with cricket. Cricket is just there's no passion there anymore. There's very few characters. I think sport is lacking a lot of characters, and yes, the culture within sport has for the most part changed. There's still things that I think there's a less. I think there still is that boozing, party, laddish kind of playboy kind of culture. Um, But I think, or as the Aussies call it, that larrikin, that kind of, cheeky chappy, they are, those kind of characters are still in sport. There's just less of them. And I think some of the antics that Gazza got up to in a fun way was, yeah, he was a bit of a court jester. He was a bit of a comedian. He liked having a laugh. That's before obviously his life unravels and the alcoholism and the media stuff around his life and his marriage breakdown and the latter half. The early when he's at Newcastle, Paul Gascoigne was actually he was one of the lads. He was a local lad who loved the community he was from, loved his club, loved his teammates, and I think moving to Tottenham was the worst thing to happen to Paul Gascoigne. It was the worst thing to happen for him. Yes, but the media, built up that radish culture in the 90s and the early 2000s. They created it with the Loading magazine, the Nuts magazine, the FHM. The I wouldn't say laddish culture. I'd say more colourful characters. The the more human side, because we are human beings, and professional athletes are human beings. They are allowed to be human. I think I go for the three strike policy. If you screw up three times, I think especially if you're in a privileged position, you should be done. Um, there's only so many second and third chances you can give a human being before you go, this bloke or this woman is beyond salvaging as a pro athlete or as a politician or as as an educator or as a you know journalist or whatever you find in life. But now you need characters like Paul Gascoigne in a sense of that they have youthful exuberance. They enjoy what they're doing, and they have fun, and they are infectious fun, and they bring out because especially in professional sports where you change teams and you might move the other side of the country or to a new country. If you've got that kind of friendly, carefree kind of personality in a dressing room, you can go, you see the new guy, and he's a bit nervous, and you go over and you just go, I'm having a laugh. I'm so and so. I think that kind of person, those kind of characters, are healthy for the sport. It's when they go too far or when there is an issue there with alcohol or drug use, which again, Paul Gascoigne, Diego Maradona, George Best, that's where that kind of fun, carefree kind of character, there is a line. But we still need characters within the sport who have that kind of enjoyment about life. I think that's coached out of players. I think that the media are like, oh no, 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 you can't do that. Fuck off. Let me be human. Let me enjoy what I'm doing. If you take that joy out of it, then it becomes mechanical, and then that's where the mental health side of it comes in. And I do think Paul Gascoigne's transfer to Tottenham was the worst thing that could have happened to him because he left his support network of the local community. And obviously, after he retired, it did come out that his best friend died in a road traffic collision in front of him when they were kids. Got knocked down by a car, and you know, obviously back then in the early 80s, what we know now as mental health and post traumatic stress disorder wasn't really known about. So if that happened now, that's a different beast to deal with. Um, and I think yeah, we I think yeah, the media. I think the media's always been poisonous, though. Um, the media's always been poisonous in this country. We can go back to the 50s and 60s for that. The media's always been poisonous. Um, but at the same time, the media promoted that laddish culture, and now they're trying to say, "Oh no, it's evil. You created it." I think things will change. Fun will come back. Yeah, I think the good thing about Paul Gascoigne is his early days at Newcastle. There's a very famous video clip of him with the mullet wig, just mucking around at training, and even the coaches are just, up there are just wetting themselves with laughter. They don't know what to do. It's like, actually, we need this. We've had a couple of bad results, and he's cheered everyone up. You need that kind of positive attitude around a dressing room where there is humour, there is enthusiasm, there is joy. And that was Paul Gascoigne stone cold sober. He didn't need any alcohol there. His move to Tottenham, in my mind, is the moment where things go downhill for him because he's taken away from his support network. He's taken away from his friends and family and his community where it's more relaxed. And I'm not saying we need a George Best who goes out on the piss every night. And there's plenty of players who are decent human beings, who are characters, who have an alcohol problem, past and present. Paul Merson and Tony Adams are a prime example of that at Arsenal at the peak of their careers. The concern I have, and I remember I found some footage. I'm a Blackburn fan, so I'm a member of a few social media fan groups and fan groups online, and someone posted the footage post the League Cup win, and there are some characters in that dressing room in that team that when they're relaxed and not in front of the and not giving the boring press conference on we played well, they're all mucking around, they're all having fun. Yes, they've just won a trophy and they brought success to the club, but even the players who didn't get to play that day, they're having a laugh, they're relaxed. They're pulling pranks on each other. They put shaving foam in someone's locker, and they're putting ice buckets over it. And there's no tension in that room. That is a room that is full of relaxed people that are happy and working. And Souness being Souness, I mean, he's joined in as well. And I wouldn't see Souness as a bit of a larrikin, but he's clearly enjoying the moment, and that for me is what I think sports lacking. But yes, the media did create and glamorise the laddish 90s rebellious culture, and then they're now saying it's evil and toxic 20, 25 years later. You helped make that glamorous image of lads being lads, and then you did what they did to Paul Gascoigne. And partly, you've got to take some responsibility for your own actions. And addiction is, it's not pleasant, and we can go, oh, he's a wife-beating alcoholic, but he wasn't always a wife-beating alcoholic. The media, especially the tabloid media, he was, the Gaz's tears and all that. They latched onto him in Italia '90, and then over the next 8 to 10 years, ruined his life. Personally, why do I think Italy have downgraded so much since last year? To be fair, and I will say this, I think a lot of sides, a lot of players are now feeling the fatigue of the condensed season that we've just had and we're about to have. And looking at some of the comments players have made in press conferences about the Nations League games that are coming up, they're just glorified friendlies, really. And they're not wrong, but they're not 100% right. I think there's a better way to sort out the international calendar and the international. I think Italy, with some senior players in the squad who are older, and trying to balance. If the Euros took place on time, do they win it? The Euros actually took place in 2020. Do Italy win the tournament? That's a question. That's a hypothetical. I don't think they've downgraded. I just think when you're trying to do parallel a tournament and qualifying campaigns at pretty much the same time, because of the delay to the Euros, I think they did not look right. And Hungary, they did really well in the Euros. They played really well in the Euros and were unlucky, I felt, not to get. I think they were the best performing team in their group. They played with the best energy and the best commitment, and they haven't qualified for the next World Cup. Spain should have been maybe so, but I think Italy, that was when they peaked. They peaked at the right time to win a tournament, but at the same time, they couldn't replicate that emotion and that energy and that commitment a few weeks later in the qualifiers. That's how it goes. It's as simple as that. But I've noticed a lot of players are looking out of sorts. Not just in the English system with the FA Cup games that I've watched, and of course watching 2 and a bit finals. I fell asleep during the Conference League final between Roma and Feyenoord, but I did notice in the Europa League final players looking leggy very early on in the game. Even though it was a fantastic final and both sides, went for it. And Frankfurt, I think, yeah, they rode their luck at times, but at the end of the day, it was a very good game. It had to go to penalties because you couldn't separate either side, and I think both sides put 110% in. I noticed players were looking leggy. Now, not all those players have played international tournament football as well, or but I think I do think that because the COVID pandemic impacted things as it did 2 years ago, in the last year and a half, because the resumption of play came later, there was a lot of they've sandwiched a lot of games in, uh, and players are looking tired. They played a lot of football, and it is catching up, and players are feeling it. And there's been more injuries, and some players have been playing through injuries that in other seasons they would have rested and recovered from. And Italy do have some world class players. But yeah, I honestly think, and I'm being fair here, I think it is an unfair assessment, that um, some players have been playing through injury that in other seasons and other tournaments they would have been rested for. And they wouldn't have played through and be going, okay, we'll take a few months out of the game or a few weeks, rest up, have that surgery, let's do that rehab, let's ease up your training. Well, we're running out of fit players. You've got to play. You've got to play. We'll try and rotate you. You've got COVID. Yeah, and I think UEFA are going to have to look at rules concerning the squad size, like bringing back the reserves for one, and they're going to have to look at. I mean, they brought in the 5 substitutions, but we didn't have 5 substitutions before COVID. Um, and does that impact the game differently? Does it affect the game differently? I don't know. But we didn't have 5 subs before COVID. And again, there were concerns about player welfare. Were the players playing too much? Was there too much fatigue in the game? You know, are they playing too many games per season? Why is this lagging again? That kind of thing. Spain will win the World Cup. Nah, I don't think so. I don't think so. I'm not disputing that they might not have a good. Both sides might not have a good tournament. Germany didn't look great last year. Spain didn't look great last year. And the last World Cup, Germany weren't great either. And Spain middling. I think they both peaked in the last decade. They both peaked, between 2010 and 2014, and they're now in that kind of little trough. They're still developing world class players, but I think Germany, their golden generation, there's a lot of young players coming through at the same time that in 4, 5, 6, 7 years will be that, you know, as a good core. Spain, they don't play with a centre forward, even though they've got centre forwards who are perfect for playing the role that they drop that false 10, false 9. Spain have centre forwards in clubland who do really well, but they don't play them in the right positions when it comes to the international game because they play with that false 9, false 10 kind of no false 11, where they're playing attacking midfielders as centre forwards. And while that works maybe just for grinding out results in a season, like 1-0s, 2-0s, 2-1s, like Man City do a lot of the time, ironically. Yes, they can score a lot of goals when the opposition is demoralised, but against good opposition, it's hard to do. Nah, Spain were not the best team at the Euros, not by a long shot. Did you watch the Euros last year? Did you watch every game last year? Because there were some better teams. Spain did not look good. They had one good game. In my opinion, they had one good game against Slovakia. The rest of their games, they were not good. They really weren't good. One good game where they scored a hatful of goals does not make a good team. Sorry. A team that doesn't get past the second round is not a good team. Sorry about that. Sorry to burst your bubble. A team that gets to like the semi-final stage and loses could be the best team that doesn't win. But a team that only gets to the second round and goes, yeah, you know what, we're gonna stuff this. To me, not a good team. And tactically, there are weaknesses in their game, and one good game doesn't make a good side. And there's too much infighting within Spanish football politically between the Basques, the Catalans, and the Castilian players. Yeah, no, Wow, they scored 5 twice. Against what opposition, though? Because they were really poor in the group stage. One good game in the group stage. They don't know. I don't know what Spain team you were watching, but 2010 and 2008 were over a decade ago. Please, whatever you're smoking in that point. They still conceded 3 goals against an aging Croatia side. That Croatia side was not a good side. Still put 3 past them. So you're saying that was a brilliant defence. Too open for me. And that was a crap Croatia side. Even Croatia said we didn't play well at that tournament. That was an aging Croatia side. That is not the side they were in the last decade. Yeah, let's get Rakitic and Modric. Let's wheel them out. They're in their late 30s. That is not a good Croatia side. They weren't a good Croatia side. I'm being brutally honest. If you've watched as much football as I have, Spain, yeah, Nations League run. What German players are actually playing? Because you've got to look at what's actually on the field, and every team has that bad result. So, and even when Spain won the World Cup, they lost to Switzerland 1-0. I think Spain are overrated. They haven't won a tournament since the 2010 World Cup, and when it comes to their club size dominating Europe, how many Spanish players actually take the field in the starting 11 and on the bench? Vanarama, yeah, 20 grand goes a long way, especially with the National League and how they've been impacted in the last 2 years by COVID and the finances of clubs at that level. And well, okay, yeah, 2012, that's a decade ago. Yay. And they had to do that in a penalty shootout against Italy, so they're not that great. Let's be realistic here. How many Spanish players actually played for Real Madrid against Liverpool? How many Spanish players? Oh, look, Barcelona didn't make a European final this year. If you actually look at it, how many Spanish players actually were on the field for Real Madrid and in the squad? I know Italy beat us on penalties, but they weren't that great. I know it was the 2008 knockout stages they beat Italy on penalties, and that was a crap Italy side at the time. Really crap Italy side back in 2008. You've come up with one player who's Spanish, who was on the field for which club? Oh yeah, Liverpool. Oh dear. So don't tell me this Spain side's a good side, please. They're not. They can't even play with a centre forward. That's 2 players, and Torres didn't play in there. De Gea, he didn't. What's De Gea? De Gea's form is dreadful right now. By the way, might have been a bit better this season, but really, he's not even number 1 anymore for Spain. And Kepa, don't even get me started on Kepa and his time at Chelsea, because that's been a complete misadventure. Look how much money they paid for Kepa and the disaster that has been at Chelsea. No, Spanish players. There's a problem with Spanish football because they are also living in the past, much like English football does and German football. They're living in the past of past glories, and yeah, I'll leave that there. I think Spanish football is overrated. I think the Spanish system is overrated, and if you were to really study Spanish football, the toxicity and the political mess that is the Spanish FA, La Liga, and the infighting between the Catalans, the Basques, and the Castilians, and the Andalusians, and yeah. Okay, I asked about how many Spanish players took the field for Real Madrid. Now you're naming players at a multitude of clubs that didn't play in the Champions League final. And most of the players you're mentioning don't even play in Spain in the domestic league. Shows the strength of the Spanish league if the best Spanish players allegedly are playing outside of it. Same with France. There's a reason why the Spaniards care more about Spain and about Real Madrid and Barca. More Real Madrid and Barca. The Catalans and Basques don't want to be part of Spain. They want to be separate of Spain and be separate countries. Yeah. Spain is a very divided nation. Don't get me started on Spanish history and politics because I'll bore you to death. Read up about the Spanish Civil War and what the Catalans and Basques feel about Madrid and the Spanish state. It's more than just football for them. They care more about the classic El Clasico and the regional derbies than the national side. I think we'll find. Oh, but no, don't get me wrong. The Basque players will be well. Yeah, we're the Spanish. Will win everything with Spain, but in reality, they want to be Catalan or Basque or Andalusian. I'm interested to see how many will be at the playoff final on Sunday at the London Stadium. Yeah, that's going to be interesting. That's going to be very interesting, actually. And bearing in mind both clubs are from Solihull from the Midlands and Grimsby are from just I would say the northeast really, Cleethorpes, Grimsby. They've got to travel a fair way, and technically it's a bank holiday weekend if you count tomorrow and Friday. Yeah, no, that's going to be interesting to see how that all pans out. In my opinion. Um, so if you're half English and half Italian, wait, ticky tacky. You want to watch the opposition get bored to death. Spanish football does not entertain me at all. Um, I'm sorry. If I want to be bored to death, I'd rather watch paint dry. I find the Spanish style, while it's nice and the nice little skilly, intricate passing triangles, Spain have been guilty of passing themselves to death. And just rewatch the Switzerland Spain game in the 2010 World Cup. Spain were guilty of passing themselves into boredom. And actually, the Spanish system that they play is actually very easy to shut down if you get the press right. And actually, it's very, very easy to defeat heavily as well. Spain have had some bad. I would say Holland versus Spain in 2014, where they lose 5-1, and that was an average Holland side. That was their only good game, actually, at the 2014 World Cup. Yeah. The Spanish system only works because it bores the opposition to death. Really, I don't find it satisfying. I actually find I'd rather take heroin, but there you go. um, no, I was trying to get onto talking about Major League Baseball and stuff like that, and the NRL and discussing some overseas leagues and things that they could do. And I've done some videos lately where I do discuss this, and I've mentioned it in live streams. With the London Stadium, I think this was yesterday. We were discussing this, and the fact that taxpayer money has to fund a reconfiguration of the playing surface for Major League Baseball. And if more people knew about that, how would that then impact the PR and the response to Major League Baseball coming here? Because if they were to play at the Oval, that's owned by Surrey Cricket Club, and therefore Surrey Cricket Club and Major League Baseball, that's how it works out. Okay, again, what Spanish games are you watching? Because there were some games where they don't have a shot at target at all with that system. And Guardiola uses the same system that Spain, tiki-taki sort of hybrid that Spain used between 2008 and 2014. And I'm going to tell you now, in the FA Cup semi-final, I think it was until their first goal they didn't have a shot on target. And there was another game where it took like 60, 70 minutes for them to ping a shot. So there you go. The Spain system sometimes they only get that one shot on target, and I think Real Madrid in the first half until 40 minutes didn't have a shot on target. So yeah, the Spain style sometimes it really isn't great, and Real Madrid were holding on, and I think they did steal the Champions League. I think they stole that final. Personally, myself. Um, yes, it was okay. Back to the Major League Baseball series. Yeah, so initially they were meant to come in 2017 and they didn't. And then they started doing when you do your stadium assessment, work out what would be a suitable venue. They were doing their case assessments and they wanted to use the Oval. Partly because it isn't the home of English cricket, which is Lords, and they and there's a slope at Lords on the pitch, so that doesn't make it. That means it's unusable Lords with the slope that goes across the wicket. So if you watch anything to do, if you watch the highlights of the cricket tomorrow, watch the Test match tomorrow, you'll see the Lords has a slope. You would have to raise one side pitch up 6 feet. That's a lot of earth you've got to move, and I don't think the MCC um, uh, had done that. So they wanted to use the Oval, and of course the Cricket World Cup has been scheduled in 2019 because they delayed coming. That clashed, and the organisers were like, "No, you can't use the Oval. We've got a major international tournament the last 6 weeks that we're playing." So they had to find another stadium in Greater London that would be able to accommodate at least 20 to 40,000 people, where the stadium owners wouldn't mind them digging up their pitch and putting baseball mounds and pitching mounds and batting cages on. And the only one that was willing to be mutilated was London City Stadium. Problem is, that's technically owned by London City Council, well, London Authority. So basically, the mayor's office and all that, and then it's technically owned by Quango, which is a government non-electoral department that deals. It's the civil service basically, um, and taxpayer money was used to reconfigure the playing surface to play on. And any time that they move the retractable seating and they have athletics there, or rugby league's played there, rugby union's been played there in the past, taxpayer money goes into preparing the pitch. So Rugby League World Cup in 2013, the Rugby Union World Cup in 2015, obviously when the anniversary games has taken place in the past, government money goes into that. Taxpayer money funds any kind of tweaks to the facility. And so a lot of people don't realise that, and I covered that in my, back in 2019 when I discussed the success or failures and where they could do better, and my assessment of the 2019 series between the Yankees and the Red Sox. And that was one of the things I brought up was a lot of people didn't realise that it cost taxpayer money, about 4 million at the time for 2 games. So imagine having 6 more games with the cost of living going up and everything getting more expensive. That's going to be higher this time around. So that in itself is a concern. That taxpayer money is going into the place. So if they do use London City Stadium again, that's got to be a factor in how they try and sell the product and how much money they make. If they make a profit on it, and enough money goes back into the local economy to pay off the taxpayer money used, then okay. But that's going to be a concern. And that has to be, there has to be that preparation. The Queen Elizabeth Path, they are, and here's a little tidbit, and this is quite interesting. Now with the Elizabeth line or Crossrail being fully open now, you can actually get to Stratford quicker than you could do for the Olympics. So over budget, a couple of years late, but we've got Crossrail. The Oval is quite easy to get to, and it's more centrally located. You just get out of Vauxhall Station or Clapham Junction or even Waterloo, and you can walk there pretty much. It's not a million miles away from Clapham Junction, Vauxhall, and Vauxhall Station. You can see it from the actual train station going towards Waterloo. It's on the right hand side. You can actually see the cricket ground. It's 5-10 minute walk. There's an underground station there on the Northern Line. So if you get into Waterloo, just get the Northern Line to Oval. There you go. So it's on the underground as well. So the Oval is not hard to get to, but Stratford International is where the Olympic Stadium is. Now, until 1997, and this is a little random tidbit that I found out the other day, and I am a bit of a railway nerd. I'm not gonna lie, I'm a bit of a train spotter. That's where the largest locomotive shed in the UK was housed, was at Stratford until 97. Yeah. I'm sad that I know that. And that used to be a big railway sidings and locomotive depot and diesel depot, steam locomotive depot back in the 60s, 50s. Big railway network in that part of East London. for locomotive servicing and carriage sidings and all sorts. And of course, that shut down in the late 90s, and it was the derelict. And that was a big part of the redevelopment. Was there was a there was also loads of related industries to the railways in that part of East London, which is one of the reasons why the Olympic Stadium is there as part of the urban regeneration. Um, and so there is that. Um, I've never been to the Oval. I've been to Lords. Never been to the Oval. I've been to Twickenham. I've been to the old Griffin Park at Brentford. Been to Vicarage Road. But I've never been to the new Wembley. My cousin has. And I haven't been to the London City Stadium because it's just the wrong side of London for me. Although it is easier now to get there with Crossrail being a thing. Again, for Stratford International and all that on the underground and Crossrail. But I've been to a lot of stadiums and events. I've been to Wells Court. I've been to Kingston Olympia. So the conference hall there. I've been, to the Barbican Centre, which is in central London, which is another big conference where they've had boxing in the past. So I've been onto a lot of the arenas and stadiums in and around London, but not to the Oval, which is on my bucket list because it's actually easier for me to get to the Oval than it is to get to Lords. So if there's a test match at the Oval, I'll obviously try my best to get there. I don't like the fact that, we've got to finish second in the group because our next opposition is more difficult. We beat Germany at the Euros by finishing first in the group. You've got to try and win every game. The best teams sometimes win the World Cup or the Euros, and generally they win every game. I don't like that negative thinking. Oh, if we finish second in the group, or because we've got enough goals and we finish third in the group, we can get an easier. No, always go out to be the best you can be, which is to win every game. I don't like that. Oh, we've got to finish second, or no, win. Try your best every game. Try and win every game. That's the. I think that's where in 2018 Gareth Southgate dropped a hint that maybe if we finish second, we'll. No, you want to go out and win. That negative mindset's got to disappear. I hate that. What stadiums would I like to go to on my bucket list? There's actually now. I mean, I did a list of arenas and stadiums in the US and Canada I want to go to, but only Soldier Field in Chicago, and that's due for redevelopment. So it'll still be Soldier Field in Chicago. It'll still be there, but it's due to have some work done to it. I think for the World Cup football, maybe for the Rugby World Cup as well, because I think they're going to use that. It's possibly they're going to use that as a venue because they've played rugby there before and massive crowds. So I think Soldier Field in Chicago will be one. The Azteca in Mexico City is another one. And that was the first stadium to host 2 World Cup finals. So, I would love to go to the Maracanã, but it's not the same Maracanã that was built for the 1950 World Cup. And so, the San Siro before they knock it down, because I think the San Siro is due for a further redevelopment or replacement at some point in the next 10 or so years. This is Italy, one with infrastructure projects. This could be 100 years' time before they replace the San Siro, but I wouldn't mind going to the San Siro. There's a couple of Bundesliga stadiums that I want to go to, and there's a couple of French stadiums I want to go to. I want to go to the Stade Velodrome in Marseille. That's a very historical stadium. I know they've reconfigured it slightly, and it's not exactly the same as what it was in years past. They've now put undercover seating now. So that's changed a little bit. But the Stade Velodrome, still the basic core of the stands is still the same, but they've made some changes, which is expected. But that was an iconic stadium with its uncovered seating, with the shape of the stands and the sloping on the stands, because it used to be a velodrome for cycling originally. The Stadio Olimpico is a fantastic facility for both rugby and football, and the way the players come out the tunnel underneath the athletics track, fantastic. Same with the old Stadio Flaminio, which is falling down now, which is sort of a little bit of an abandoned stadium, but there is that. The San Nicolo in Bari, that is basically shaped like the Colosseum from Italia '90. That was what it was built for. That's a 56,000 seat stadium being played in Serie B. In Australia, I want to go. Well, the Gabbers, the Gabba, the MCG. The Wacker Oval, which is the old Western Australian Cricket Association Oval, so Perth, is gone now. They've replaced it with a new stadium for Aussie rules and cricket in Perth, which is a shame, but can't go to the Wacker now. The Sydney Cricket Ground's having some investment done into it. They're going to be upgrading some of the stands at the SCG as well. But the MCG is like 100,000 people. I do want to go see an AFL Grand Final at the MCG at some point. That is on my bucket list. I love the new stadium in Townsville, which the Cowboys play at. I think it's Queens Bank Stadium, or whatever they call it, for sponsorship. But the new stadium in Townsville, the Cowboys' new home stadium, is fantastic. I think it's more attractive than Suncorp and Cbus Super Stadium, or the Robina Stadium as it should be called, and Lang Park, which is the official name for Suncorp in Brisbane. I do like the new Townsville. It's basically the Townsville City Stadium, really, but for sponsorship reasons, it's called like the Queensland Country Bank Stadium, which I hate that. But the way they've designed it with the sloping like it goes down like a sort of like a horseshoe kind of shape. That's a beautiful looking stadium. The new Parramatta Stadium, or Comsbank as it's called now, I think used to be called Bank West. I would like to go there. Um, there's a couple. There's a couple of stadiums around, but in reality, it doesn't bother me really. I've done a lot of league, football league, and Premier League stadiums, past and present. And I live not too far from Reading's. I actually walked back from Reading's training ground to my flat last week. I finished my bin round literally right opposite Reading's training ground, which is only an hour and 20 minutes walk. I literally I can walk to Reading's training. I mean, it's a 5 minute drive from where I live, but for a walk you have to do a different walk. You can't just cut across all the fields. If I cut across all the fields, I would be there in like half hour. And so yeah, Reading's training facility is actually built on former army property, which is why they got it so cheap, because the MOD was selling off the land. It's on former army property on the old army base in Arborfield. It's a fantastic little facility. I have to admit, Reading's training ground is actually quite a nice modern facility for the size of it. It's quite nice. And that's just down the road. I've been to the Dayscale a lot of times. Hell of a, I've been to the Dayscale a lot. What major sporting events have I been to? Nothing major. I've been to like FA Cup. I've been to an FA Cup quarter final. I've been to an FA Youth Cup quarter final as well. Been to a few quarterfinals actually. I've been to a lot of FA Cup games. I've been to a lot of regular Premier League and Football League games, regular season games when I was younger. I've been to a Tetley Cup final, which is basically the old rugby union version of the FA Cup between Newcastle and Harlequins. I've been to the London Twickenham double header back in the day. I've been to Lords for a Test match. I've been to many an ice hockey game, pre-season and regular season games. But I haven't been to a sporting event in about 3 years. It's been a while. But I've been to Twickenham when it's been sold out before, which is and that's when the old South Stand was still a separate stand before they fully completed the full, development of Twickenham as we see it today. When the South Stand was a separate standalone stand at the south end of Twickenham. And I've been to Twickenham when it's been at the time, I think that was a 70,000 seat sellout or something in '99. Which was it was really, I think, the biggest crowd I'd ever seen. And 3 years prior, I'd been to Anfield when they were still building what is now the away end opposite the Kop, and they were still putting the roof and the upper level onto the away end. So it was still sort of building sites. The capacity was less than what it is now. And that, at that point, was the biggest number of people I'd ever seen. Like, 35, 36, 40,000 people. And then going to Twickenham was something else. I just was not prepared for that. But then I've been to Twickenham multiple times. And I've been to multiple. I've been to a sold out, Fratton Park. I've been to a sold out St Mary's, a sold out Griffin Park back in the day, Vicarage Road before they fully did the main stand where the teams come out. Years before they were back in the Premier League. This is when they were still in. This was in between Gordon Taylor and their return to the Premier League the first time. So after um, Taylor's time, when they had at that point a historically low points total in the Premier League. I think it was like 21 points they got that season or something. Back in 99 2000. So after that, I went several times. Well, technically, it was like 3.5 stands. They had a section that was shut off because it was still terraced and they hadn't had the money to develop it or the planning permission. Yeah, I've been to the New St Mary's. I've been to a lot of games. A lot of games around the southeast. I just haven't been for a very very long time. And I think my favourite stadium I've been to, not Craven Cottage, it's Loftus Road. When Fulham were playing at Loftus Road, when Craven Cottage was having its last batch of development, not the current batch, the last batch of development, I found Loftus Road the most intimidating atmosphere and the closest you can get to the pitch as well, because the first 2-3 rows of the stadium are actually below pitch level. Your eye level is about here, so there's the pitch, and your eye level is about there. You really are on pitch level. You're very, very close to the dugout. So I think that's my favourite stadium I've been to is Loftus Road. How much more development QPR can do with Loftus Road is another question entirely. But that's my favourite stadium I've been to, and it's not the biggest capacity. I think it's about 16, 17,000 capacity or something at Loftus Road. It's not the biggest capacity that you could have, but it's a really intimidating atmosphere because you're very close to the pitch. Not a bit closer than Prenton Park for Tranmere. Or that if you are the away side and QPR are doing well in the league, and the fans are really, or even if you're the home side in QPR and you're having a crap game, you're going to really feel that atmosphere. It's one of the more intimate, intimidating grounds that I've been to. And I actually really enjoyed my trips to QPR. I really did. I do miss going to football, and there's been rugby league international play Loftus Road as well. What got me into so many sports? Just firstly, my dad was quite an avid sportsman, and since he's passed away, I found out more about his sporting exploits. Since obviously he passed away 12.5 years ago, things I never knew about him, and my granddad as well. So my dad's family are quite athletic, and that I think my dad's enthusiasm and my granddad's enthusiasm, both my granddads actually, the one I got on with and the one I didn't, both were very enthusiastic about sport. Both my dad and both my granddads have played semi-pro at various sports. An amateur, and when my dad was in the army, he played for several army teams and regimental teams in a rugby and football and field hockey and athletics. So my dad was quite an athletic and sporty individual anyway. And had he not, had me and my sister when he did, or had my sister been a bit younger, he could have been a professional footballer. I've since found out. He turned down a potential, admittedly lower league professional football career to stay in the army. So there you go. Yeah. But again, when I was a kid, very young kid, we had cable, and I think at the time you got an armed forces discount, and for cable and satellite TV, you could go, I've got me blue card or army ID. There you go, 25% off, whatever it was. There was a scheme in place where you got discounted TV and media stuff. And I had one day we had BBC One, 2, ITV, Channel 4, and then the next day I woke up and we had 600 channels, and a third of them was sport. My dad dropping that one in there, and from about the age of 3-4 years old, I fell in love with the super bikes. I fell in love with Aussie rules and rugby league, football, rugby union, the NHL. With my dad going to Canada a lot on army exercises, obviously got to see the Battle of Alberta when it meant something in the 80s and the 90s, and had access to um, watching that, and then it went from there. So the rest is history. I think with my dad, because he would always wear his Harlequins shirt around. I think one of his friends from the army actually left the army to play for Harlequins at one point. Um, he would always wear his Harlequins uh, shirt around when he was on leave and he was back home. That was his favourite top, was his Harlequins top. Um, there was always that sort of connection with sport, and I just sort of carried it on really. And I think there was a big emphasis in my house of it didn't matter how good or bad you were at something, just give it a go, try it at least once. And for me, as a kid, I was obsessed with football. And yes, I'm a Blackburn fan, but I had a Brazil kit, I had a Liverpool kit, I had an England kit, I had multiple Blackburn shirts. I had a couple of World Cup footballs, I had multiple World Cup footballs actually. I had a Euro '96 football. Um, I Yeah, and then as I got a bit older, I got more into my ice hockey and my rugby league and my rugby union. First sport when I watched on TV. Oh God, that I can remember. I can vaguely remember Euro '92. I think bit young. I think definitely World Cup USA '94. I remember very vividly because I was technically. I will say this. I hadn't been very well. I seem to remember, and I was still in what you would class as preschool. And because the US East Coast is 5 hours behind, the kickoffs were weird. So they were actually playing a lot of the US '94 games earlier in the day than what we would normally associate with World Cups and Euros, when we normally associate that like set 5 to 7 p.m. kind of kickoff, slightly cooler in the evening, you know, and so the US were very, very conscious of the fact in 1994, which is completely different now, but '94, that most of their TV audience would be in Europe, um, South America notwithstanding, but most of their TV audience would be a European TV audience. So their kickoff times were really, really weird, and there was a lot of criticism at the time, which is probably why the tournament wasn't the best tournament looking back on the quality of play. They were playing in the heat of the day in a US summer. Sometimes in the US, in the daytime, you're looking at 40, 45 degrees Celsius heat in some states. And they were playing in that kind of heat in the height of summer in the US. And that's where the criticism from fans and looking at like World Cup '98, yes, it was shared on BBC and ITV. They've always had shared rights since the '90s of both on BBC and ITV for World Cup games. It's been a thing since I think '94. Definitely, I think Italia '90 was solely on the BBC, I believe, but definitely from USA '94, it's been on both channels, BBC and ITV. But USA '94, the criticism was that the games were being played too early in the day and the heat was having an impact, and in some places the humidity. And there was a lot of criticism that that affected the quality of the products that we saw, which also I think didn't help sell it to the Americans early on with the MLS and the quality of the MLS early on as well. Um, the one I have the fondest memories of was not USA '94, but is definitely Euro '96, and to a certain extent France '98. They're the two tournaments that, as a younger kid, um, that I remember more fondly. Even though my favourite tournament is Germany 2006 for the quality of play, the ones I remember most fondly were Euro 96 and France 98. Um, there was just something about that period in time with the game, and I've always said this. I think the highest quality of football played 94, so end of USA 94, all the way through to the end of Switzerland, Austria 2008, the Euros. Then that for me is when football was at its best. That 14-year period, um, and that's my personal opinion on that. But no, yeah, the first major sporting event I really remember was USA '94. Although I did watch the occasional Euro '92 and a few other sporting events like what was the Five Nations with my dad at the time on the old BBC. It's still in the amateur era. After USA '94, you've got South Africa Rugby Union World Cup in 1995. Yes, it was England failed to qualify in '94. Yes, you are correct. Graham Taylor was England manager, and we conceded that goal against San Marino in the first minute of play, famously, and the rest is history. Uh, we didn't qualify. He did get the sack. That's where Dave Bassett, England manager, sort of based on Graham Taylor and or Gordon Taylor and was it Graham Taylor? His time as England manager and it not working out. Um, and he wasn't a bad manager. He really wasn't. He got a lot of crap, but he wasn't a bad manager. Um, it was England were going through a transition period, much like a lot of teams are going through a transition period, both in club and country. The game was going through a transition period with the issues with the football league, and then the split with the Premier League clubs, and the game was going through a transition period anyway across Europe and across the world. Actually, the game was changing, and it just so happened that he was the manager at the time that in this period of time when all these changes are taking place, and the great players of the 70s and 80s were coming to the end of their time, and the class of '92 at Man United, for example, hadn't quite come into their own. They were coming through. Obviously, some of the young Arsenal players were coming through. A young Alan Shearer was starting to make sounds, and was about to go to Blackburn, and Chris Sutton was about to sign there. So there was a young Matt Le Tissier was doing his things at the Dell. There were some good young England players coming through at the time. Darren Anderton, if you could say fit. And the dominance of clubs like Liverpool was coming to an end. Maradona was obviously having his issues, which was affecting his play at Napoli. So that period of dominance in Italian football for Napoli was starting to wobble. Um, there was some young players. So the game was in a transition period anyway. There was a golden generation of players across Europe and South America all coming through at the same time. And the game was about to embark on its first tournament in North America globally. Graham Taylor inherited a team where players like Lineker had just retired. John Barnes was right near the end of his career. There was a change in goal with David Seaman was going to be the number one. So they had not fully settled on a number one goalkeeper. Shilton obviously had retired. So there was a changing of the guard with England as well. That was a team in transition. I wouldn't say they were a bad side. There were some good players. The Premier League was in its infancy, and Euro '92 had been a really poor tournament for England. We didn't play very well. And this is on the back of Italia '90, Gazza's tears, obviously World Cup in '86 with the hand of God, the Euros in '88 not going 100% to plan, but there was a big change with the England team. Yeah, Lineker, for example, retiring from international football. Shilton retiring. So there was a big transition with the midfield, defence. Um, the squad was in transition. Um, Players like Ian Wright were starting to get a run of the side. The older Alan Smith, not the Alan Smith who played for Man United, the Alan Smith that played for Arsenal, who's now a Sky commentator, um, was now basically your Lineker's replacement. He's not quite the same player as Lineker. He's a good player, Alan Smith. He's not the same. He was part of that Euro '92 debacle. Um, Players like Chris Sutton and Shearer were coming through at the time. You had the class of '92 at Man United. That, in a few years later, would start impacting the national side and getting game time, like your Nicky Butts, your Paul Scholes, your David Beckhams, the Neville brothers. They would come through. You had a reasonably young Teddy Sheringham floating around. He was just getting attention. Um, that was 6 weeks after. So that was 6 weeks after the tournament. He didn't like die straight away. It was a good period after, and there's been discussions about, was it a deliberate hit? Was it just an altercation in a bar? Was there actually links with the cartels, with Pablo and Andres? It was 6 weeks later, but that was a big moment in the consciousness of Colombians. That's when Colombians were like, we've had enough of this. These are our hope. This Colombian team is what unites this nation. You're now killing them. We're out. We've had enough. That was the moment, I think, for the population of Colombia to go, enough's enough now. We want change. We want this civil, not just the drug cartels, but the civil strife. There was political violence, left-wing militias, right-wing government, um, terrorism. You've got right-wing paramilitaries. You've got left-wing paramilitaries running around. You've got the drug cartels funding both the left and right-wing paramilitaries as well. That was the turning point for Colombia on a social level, not just a sport, a social level. That was the moment that Colombians went, we need change, and it was a turning point for changing the country. And we can argue how effective that change and the cultural and social changes that Colombia needs to go through, and there's still issues in Colombia. It's not as bad as what it once was. It's still dangerous, but yeah, I think I was too young to fully understand what was actually happening, and because Andres Escobar, was not as a household name as Pablo, the cartel leader, who also died 6, 7. Not long after Andres gets shot, Pablo gets shot as well. So there was a lot of violence in Colombia at the time. Anyway, the tensions between the drug cartels and the various paramilitary groups and the government was really ramping up. And of course, the US having the Football World Cup, and the Clinton administration, this is very, very important, were involved in Somalia. They were getting more involved in Colombia, and they were trying to distance themselves from the Reagan and Bush senior administrations a few years before, obviously with the involvement in Central America and the Gulf War conflict in Kuwait and Iran. That their policy being Democrat Republicans, it's more of a topic for the other channel. But basically, there's a lot of US policy, and they made a big thing about having the World Cup and bringing people together and trying to forget about the Reaganomics era and the Reagan era, and it's a new decade, and we've got the Olympics in '96. There was a lot of political capital put into the World Cup and the Olympics. Same with Brazil with the World Cup and the Olympics 2 years apart as well. Couldn't make that up, could you? Parallels. And obviously, with the last time they had a major sporting event, which was the Olympics in Los Angeles, there was boycotts. They were trying to be a bit more different, positive, chance for change. I don't at the time remember a lot about it. I think I was too young to fully understand everything that was going on, the importance it would actually have. Bearing in mind, at the same time, you have in that point in the mid '90s, you have the Rwanda and the Burundi conflicts, the Rwanda genocide and the Burundi genocide, which people forget about the Burundi one in Central Africa, and that was actually dominating the news. So as a young kid, seeing that on the news was, I remember it. Sticks in your head. And the Yugoslav conflict and the war in Yugoslavia and Bosnia and Croatia and Slovenia and Yugoslavia and Kosovo, they are actually dominating the news more than what was happening in Colombia. So that has a sort of a bearing on how I it didn't really it only sinks in afterwards because we're a football mad nation. If we weren't a football mad country like the US weren't, because it was a Colombian assassination, Pablo Escobar's death got more news than Andres Escobar's death. But because there's a big Latin American, South American, Central American community in the US, it did make massive headlines there. Whatever makes massive headlines in the US eventually filters over the Atlantic to us in Western Europe. And because it was a football related thing, and we'd obviously seen the World Cup because England weren't in the World Cup, the British press were bold. They pick up on it, and it became a bigger story than it actually would be today, ironically, I think. Because we weren't at the tournament. And with what was going on in the Balkans and in Central Africa at the time, um, there was a lot going on at the time, and it happened. Yeah, Colombia. There was a lot of people saying that 1990 to 98 they had a bloody good team. Valderrama, Rene Higuita. Um, Valderrama, one of the best midfielders I personally think of his generation. Personal opinion, Valderrama. Rene Higuita, one of the most iconic goalkeepers. Not the best, I know. One of the most. He was also a midfielder in his youth days, and he was pretty handy in midfield. Rene Higuita, but icons of the game. And so that 8-year period, Colombia, I honestly think played more attractive football than Brazil. And on their day, they could beat anyone. And the '94 World Cup was a disaster for them anyway. Much like Germany in the Euros last year, or Germany in 2018, or Brazil in 2014, disastrous tournament. Like Brazil, okay, yes, they get to a semi-final. It's the way they lose that semi-final. Um, Colombia in 1994, 1990 and 98, the expectations were a little bit less. 94 was the moment that went, we've built for this. We can do this. And when you've got players like Valderrama dictating your midfield, in '98 they did make a very big deal about the Escobar incident in the build-up, and I remember it a little bit more because you're a little bit older, you're a bit more conscious about what's going on in the world, and I'm more aware of what's going on, and I suppose it's part of my upbringing as well, having a very politically conscious and socially conscious household that I was brought up in. I mean, my mum was a single mum at the time in '98. Um, but bear in mind, my dad was well travelled because he was in the armed forces, and did go to Central America and the Caribbean as part of his duties in British Army, because we still have colonies and Commonwealth nations out there that we do NATO drills with and other military exercises with as allies, and have training agreements and military agreements with. So he would go out to places like Belize and Jamaica and Trinidad and work with their armed forces in training them up to standard and aid, to delivering aid to the hurricanes and all that, because he was an engineer. I was at the pub for the first goal, and I was like, "Oh shit, I've got to get home." So I remember watching the first 7 minutes, and I ran home. And I only lived like a 5 minute walk from the pub, my old local, to my house at the time was a 5 minute walk. And I run home. In 2 minutes, they'd scored 3 goals, and I get in, and I was like, "What?" And I phoned one of my friends up and said, "Put on the TV. You got to put the TV on." And I said, "BBC One, you got to put it on." And he's like, "Why? Look what's happening to Brazil. He goes, don't change your set. That is actually the score." And then I ran to the toilet. I'm still on the phone, like, having a piss to me mate because I was been drinking. He goes, "Oh, you're drunk, mate. You're drunk." I said, "No, you got to check the score." And I get back, and I've had a cigarette in the garden because I wasn't allowed to smoke in my grandparents' house. And my nan's like, "You've got to check this out. This is, my nan doesn't really understand much about sport." She goes, "No, you've got to see this. This is what's going on." And I'm on the phone. Apparently, it's 5-0 now. And in the space of like 10, my friend didn't believe me. And I said, "Check out the BBC website. Put the TV on." And he goes, "I'm going down the pub." So I said, "Go down the pub." So he runs down the pub, and he goes, "You weren't joking." I said, "No, don't, just don't." And this is if I had the channel back then, just the thing would have exploded. The internet. I remember the internet going into meltdown. And I remember getting multiple text messages going, "This is bizarre. This is mental. This is mental. What's going on?" And then the day following, the aftermath um, was ridiculous. In regards to what the US did, they had some decent players, but they weren't household names. They became household names, but they weren't household names. Jose Reina, I think, was the most high-profile player out of the '90s, and Brian McBride was obviously in 2006, 2008 time was at the end of his career, but he was a young player around the squad at the time. Clint Dempsey was inspired to play the game at a high level because of the '94 World Cup. Other than that, they qualified for Italia '90, but didn't do much. '94 was their watershed moment to go, look, we've hosted this thing. We've got out the group. They got out the group, which was important. Only South Africa haven't. That was very, very important. They got out of their group. Um, and they made the knockout stages, which then got the fan, but the nation of America interested. But yes, I do remember the Germany Brazil 2014 semi final. I at first I didn't believe it at first. I saw the kickoff. I saw the first few minutes. I saw it go 1-0. Okay, it's 1-0. It happens. You sometimes concede an early goal. Brazil have got enough. Neymar will wait. Well, no, that Neymar was injured because of the quarterfinal in Colombia. But I said, look, Brazil will wake up. There's going to be a young Brazilian in that squad who's going to do something stupid and become a household name. That isn't called Neymar, who's going to come alive. And they had some good young players as well. Um, and I thought, I've got to go home because my grandparent, my nan, phoned. She was like, "Your dinner's ready." I was like, "Okay, I'm running. Put BBC One on. I'm going to run home." But she goes, "Oh, the football's on." I said, "Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's 1-0. Well, I'm going to run home. As soon as I open the door, you've got to tell me to score." She goes, "Oh, it's 3-0 now." I didn't believe her. And I went, "No, this is mad." It was 5 minutes. 5 minutes between me answering the phone to getting home. Two more goals have been scored. So it was ridiculous. I do remember it. I couldn't believe what I was seeing either. But it was one of those moments where it doesn't get repeated for a very long time, like a complete and utter mental and emotional collapse. Because it was complete and utter. Brazil, that Brazil side was already been criticised for the style of football they were playing, and having Fred up front, remember him? Yeah, and players like Hulk, remember him? Yeah. The players with stupid names like Fred and Hulk. And there was already criticism, and there had been criticism of the style of football Brazil had been playing since 1994 when Dunga was captain. That is also very, very important. They changed their style of play, and while it won them two more World Cups and got them to three World Cup finals in '94, '98, and 2002, they've not been back to the final since. So they've been criticised with the changing of their style of play, the best part of, at this point, a decade, but for the best part of 20 years, actually. No, decade. So for the last 18 years, Brazil's style of play has actually been sort of criticised by the fans as too rigid, and it doesn't suit the flair players they've had and some of the selections they've made. But it's gotten to three World Cup finals, of which they've won two. And the players that were available to Brazil between '94 and 2002 were, well, Ronaldinho, Ronaldo, Rivaldo, Bebeto, Leonardo, Taffarel, Marcos, you name it. They've had some pretty good players in that period, who I think are actually better than what Neymar is, personally. Personal opinion. And yeah, they've been criticised for sometimes the style of football that they play. And when you've got players like Cafu, who can just, as a defensive player, just do stuff that a midfielder would do, they've got the skill there. They've become more too structured. And going into, because they had the Confederations Cup 2013, and they were criticised during that warm up tournament. There was a bit of criticism. Yeah, okay, we're not sure about this side, but they do quite well. And then they go into the World Cup, and the first game they're a bit clunky, and they win the game, but they're not fluid. There's criticism of playing Fred up front. And Fred's not a bad player. I remember him playing at Lyon and actually being quite a good player. But the system they're playing, um, and even Neymar couldn't raise the spirits of the team. And there's a lot of criticism being aimed at the players, and they're clunky, and they're not fluid, and they're not at their best, and they looked vulnerable. And then Colombia did did what South American teams do, which is not only be exceptionally skillful but also exceptionally violent. And Brazil are guilty of this as well in their past, and they kicked Brazil off the pitch. And Neymar did actually have a broken back. I will give him that. They did break his back. He did have two fractured vertebrae. It was a nasty injury. The guy did drive his elbow into his back joint. It wasn't pleasant. And that was a very ill. Brazil did played into that because they also did some pretty dirty, underhanded things as well. Um, and the consequences of Neymar's injury and obviously the Colombia quarter final. And Colombia have been playing the better football as well up to that point. Why they decided to play like thugs, I do not know. Because in my opinion, Colombia could have blown Brazil off the park in that quarterfinal. With James Rodriguez just being James Rodriguez and being brilliant before Real Madrid destroyed him. Because Real Madrid do that to players, destroy them, and suck the soul out of them. Unless there's Zidane or Guti or Raul. But Real Madrid tends to destroy players emotionally and physically. But James Rodriguez was on fire. Colombia were brilliant. You know, the Colombians were playing brilliant football. Why they decided to turn into thugs, I don't know. But that's something that South American football has in their locker. All the nations, they can be brilliant one game and violent the next. I still think the psychological shock of we've lost Neymar now, we've got no hope. Because they were under that much pressure with the media and that much pressure with the fan base that they went, oh, we've got no hope now. And there was a psychological collapse. Sort of similar to the final in '98 when Ronaldo wasn't 100% and turned out he actually is epileptic and he had an epileptic seizure and was he playing? Wasn't he playing? I do remember he wasn't, he had a illness. He's epileptic, so and he had a seizure and he shouldn't have played, but he played. And we won't go into that because that's, he even says, look, yeah, no, obviously health is more important now. Ronaldo's a legend. One of the most beloved players in the history of the game. Pity his knees were so shot, but Ronaldo, uh, Ronaldo Nazario, oh, brilliant player. Um, 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 but the the emotional collapse by Brazil was worse than the '98 final because at least they had played well in that tournament up to the '98 final, and even in the '98 final, they didn't play badly. It was just France, obviously on home soil, were that just did it, and all three goals came from midfielders. And Emmanuel Petit and Zidane played the game of their lives. And on another day, against other opposition, Brazil win the '98 World Cup as well as the 2002 and '94 World Cup. They could have done a trilogy, but they didn't. What happened in 2018 has been symptomatic of Brazilian football for 2014. It's been symptomatic of Brazilian football for quite some time. And I think the seeds were sown in about 2006. You could sort of see back then that because 2010 they weren't great either. People forget the 2010 World Cup for Brazil. They weren't great then either, but there we go. The best squads. What's a difficult one? I think '98 and 2002 were very similar squads in a sense because apart from a changing goal with goalkeeper with Tafarel retiring, that period '98 2002 was when Brazil, in my opinion, were still at their best. Um, Obviously, Ronaldo was now coming into his own, um, and was a better player than what he was in '98 and 2002. But even in 2006, they still had superstar players coming through. So I think that period, Brazil were one of just had the best talent at that time, and it was only, but I think the decline was coming with Brazil. The Italian final in '94. The thing is, Italy know how to get to finals at tournaments when they get to tournaments. They're a very good tournament side, and they play what they call tournament football. Um, and we can argue, was it good or bad for football? I think, unfortunately, USA '94 was not the same level of quality as Italia '90. Um, Football went backwards for a period of time in the after Italia '90, um, and Italy just you got to break them down. They were very good on the counter attack, and they still had some superstar players who could score a hatful of goals, like Baggio, for example. It wasn't as if they were complete brick wall. It was just the style of football that Trapattoni was telling his players to play. If the Italians were allowed to play their natural game and be free of being overcoached, you would see a different scoreline. Italy have it in them to score 3 or 4 goals in a game. They've done it at tournaments before, but traditionally, shut up shop, try and get a 1-0, maybe a 2-1, be a bit more rigid and structured, and it can lead to tense, chess tactical style football, which is not a bad thing. I don't think that's a bad thing, but in sometimes in tournaments they do just in a game just explode and they'll score a hatful of goals. Um, they did it in '82, and they did it in 2006 against Ukraine. The one game they scored more than a goal a game was against Ukraine. They put 3 past them. In 2 games, they scored 5 goals in 2 games. Um, Against Brazil and Poland, and then in the final they scored 3 against West Germany in '82. So the Italians can score goals and score them in hatfuls when they want to, but it's not always the case. But you do get that Fabio Grosso moment, similar to Tardelli against the Germans, 2006. Tardelli in '82, where yeah, they've suddenly just woken up and gone sod it. We'll not only will we be pretty solid defensively, but we're going to have some guile and some skill and some pace on the ball. We're going to open up the game a little bit because we've worked you out defensively. Now we're going to work you out with our attack, and you've got to work out your defense. It's what you call the trap, kind of. In ice hockey, you call it the trap, where you shut down the neutral area of the field, which is the middle third, and you win the midfield defensive battle, where you try and keep the opposition away from your defensive third of the field, the trap. Um, Football has it, ice hockey has it, the trap, where you turn the neutral or the middle third of the field into a battleground. You clog up the midfield, you clog up the space. You defend slightly higher up the pitch, but you don't defend with a high line. You just defend with your back three, back four, back five, however you set up your defensive system. 5 or 6 paces further forward, then pushes your midfield 5 or 6 paces further forward. But at the same time, you drop your forward players a little bit further back, and you have a holding midfielder who drops that link, and you might have a sweeper, so you don't play the offside trap. You just clog up the creative space, so the midfield. And whether you agree or disagree with Trapattoni's style of play, he was pretty good. Let's not lie. He worked out very easily to nullify the opposition. And then between '90 and I would say '95, football became very defence orientated in the sense that at international level in tournaments, average goals per game actually dropped a little bit. Um, they would rise again later on, and they were higher in the 70s. But getting to that point, that's when the game became more professional in the sense of fitness, diet, recovery, tactics. It really became stale, and several sports were finding this that they find there's a 4 or 5 year period where the game becomes a bit stale and scoring rates drop and average points per game. So if it's ice hockey, it's points per game. If it's football, it's goals per game. Rugby, it's rugby league, it's tries per game or points per game. There's a period in every team sport where average scores drop, defenses concede less, but attacks score less, and it's generally been in the last 2 3 decades that every major team sport has seen this happen for a 4 5 6 year period, like an era within an era. In ice hockey, they call it the dead puck era. In football, it's I don't know how to describe it. There's not really a term for it, but you find this very rigid, more defensive counter-attacking, but slower counter-attacking, slow-paced style. And I watched, and there's a reason why we watched a lot of Serie A football. It was really good quality, but at international level, from Italia 90 through to about the qualifications for Euro 96, the game became very defence orientated and goal scoring did drop. You look at average goals per game between 1990 and about 97, drops. There's a significant drop off in goals per game. You will see defensive stats massively improve, unless you're Swindon Town. Swindon Town, them notwithstanding, defensive stats massively improve. Swindon Town, the worst defensive record in the Premier League with over 100 goals conceded in a league season. Record. They're the aberration rather than the rule. Um, also, teams going forward, ironically, scoring less. So you don't get that 7-1 Germany Brazil game 20 years before, 10 years before. You don't. So if that was being played in 94, 95 in a World Cup, you wouldn't have seen that scoreline. You may have seen a 3-1 or you may have still seen Germany win, but it wouldn't have been 7. It would have been less. Because that's the style of play. That's why Brazil became more defence orientated in '94, because of what happened in '82, '86, and '90. They had been undone by their defensive frailties. So the Brazilians looked at the Italian system and the other European systems post 1990, around '92, '93, and they were looking at the European defensive systems massively improving, and they went, "We'll copy that." These teams are winning at club level and international level more in the time frame we've been losing because they defend better. And it's a noticeable trend from the Brazil win in 1970 to Brazil winning in '94 that defences were getting better and the quality of opposition was also levelling out and the style of play being played. That you get, I mean, look at, for example, Nottingham Forest, their 2 European Cup wins, a 1-0 penalty shootout against Malmo and Hamburg. I think it was penalty shootout. They're very low scoring finals. They are very, very low scoring finals, especially the Malmo one goal. Very low scoring, which hadn't been the case in their cup runs, but the finals, low scoring, which isn't always the case. And then goal scoring goes up. In the 1970 final is a 4-1 in the World Cup. The 74 finals are 2-1. The 82 finals are 3-1. So already the 1970 final. All right, so 1970, when Brazil win the World Cup, it's a 4-1 against Italy. 74 is a 2-1 for West Germany against Holland. No extra time. 78, it's 1-0 in normal time, goes with time, it's a 3-1 to Argentina. There's still less goals being scored than 1970, but more goals than the previous one. 82, it's a 3-1, so scoring's the same in the final, not the rest of the tournament, in the final for goals per game, right? 86, it's 3-2, goal scoring's gone up. And then you hit the 90s, 2 penalty shootouts in the final, low scoring. I think Italia 90, I think, was a 0-0 as well. Might have been a 1-1, but it went to a penalty shootout, right? And then 98 comes along, 3-0. 2002, 2-0. So goals are being scored again. Okay, not as high as earlier, but they're being scored again. 2 World Cups in 90 and 94 got a shootout. 98, 3-0. 2002, 2-0. 2006, 1-1, so goals are being scored. Same amount of goals as the previous tournament. Penalty shootout. See where I'm going here. 2010, 1-0. Goal scoring's come down again, but South Africa, similar to USA 94, goal scoring was not as good. Then we get 2014, it's a 1-0, but the semi-final before was the highest scoring semi-final we'd ever seen. 2018, 4-2. So goal scoring has been up and down. And it's only the last final that has got more goals in it than the 1970 final. Every other final has either got the same amount of goals or less. But Italia 90 and USA 94 both got a penalty shootout and drastically reduced goal scoring. 5 goals in the 86 final, and I think Italia 90 had no goals, and USA 94 definitely had no goals. I think it might have been a 1-1 in Italia 90, but they both went to penalty shootout, low scoring. 86, 5 goals to not even. So you can actually see between the 90 and 94, goal scoring comes down. But when you've got Baresi, well, look, Maldini and Baresi, well, they already were a centre-back partnership for AC Milan anyway. They were club teammates. And yeah, you know, didn't concede many goals at international level. It is a fact. But that doesn't mean you can't score goals going forward, because Squacci got the golden boot, remember? So Italy can score goals. Remember that. And they only conceded 2 goals in 2006, but they could score goals. There's only one game they didn't score a goal. No, they scored goals in every single game in 2006, but the most they scored in a game was 3. The second most was 2. So they didn't explode, but they just chipped away. They drew one game against the US 1-1, but they only conceded 2 goals, and one of them was an own goal. So only once did they concede a goal from opposition from the penalty spot. So in reality, they only conceded 1 goal in open play, which was technically from a corner, and so they didn't concede a goal from open play at all. One was from a corner, from a set play, and one was from a penalty spot. So Italy could have gone the whole tournament without conceding, which would have been ridiculous. But they scored in every single game. They just chipped away. 2 games they scored more than 1 goal, but they chipped away, and it was the battle of attrition. But they still scored goals. It's just they weren't overly prolific, but they weren't 0-0 draw. Oh, we win a game 1-0, 5 points in the group. No, not like that at all. They just built their way into the tournament, get to the knockout stages, beat Ukraine 3-0, beat Germany 2-0, immediately in extra time, and did it that way. They didn't just do like they did in 82, where they just had 3 draws. They did win games. They just weren't open and as explosive as Germany against Brazil, for example, or Brazil in 1970, where they were just scoring goals for fun, or Holland with their total football in 74 and 78, where goals were later at the side. They worked out, we need to be structured. We have the creative midfielder players. We have the defensive midfield, the box-to-box midfielders. We have the creative midfielders. We do have the strikers who are snipers. But our style is we work together as a team. We defend together. We attack together. And they're a balanced side. Italy play balanced football. Oh, and yes, the world-class goalkeepers. Yes. The difference from 86 to 90 and then 90 to 94, the goalkeepers. Oh my God. In Italia at 90, Shilton's still playing for England. Whether he, I think, Shilton, did he retire in 90 or was it before? I think Shilton was still England's keeper in 90 and it was Seaman David Seaman comes along after that as the number one. But yeah, you got 92 at the Euros. You had Peter Schmeichel in goal. Harold Schumacher, for example, for the Germans throughout the 80s. Love him or hate him, was a damn good goalkeeper. So yeah, there were some very good goalkeepers even in the 80s, but the quality level at that period, Taffarel, a young, you got a younger Peter Schmeichel. You've got some of the younger goalkeepers are coming through. Spain had a load of them. Italy had a load of them. And then Germany, Oliver Kahn comes into it in the later 90s with his development. You've got enough goalkeepers coming out of Italy to name a starting 11. I'm not joking. There's enough goalkeepers in Italy to have enough depth out of there where you could it was ridiculous the amount of goalkeepers that were being produced at this time. In the 90s, that were in youth academies in the 80s, and then in the 90s made their debuts. Like you had a young Buffon, Toldo, Chiodicini. They developed their skills in the 90s and become first team regulars in the 2000s. You've got Taffarel for Brazil. Got a young David Seaman for England, a younger David Seaman for England, who's learned his trade now. Right, a young Nigel Maitland as his backup. So they're good goalkeepers in their own right. Peter Schmeichel, Ed de Hoyt and Van der Sar. Ed de Hoyt at Chelsea, Van der Sar coming through the Ajax system and playing around Europe. Obviously, Fabian Barthez comes to his own in World Cup '98. He's a young keeper coming through at the time. A young Iker Casillas is in the Real Madrid youth system. You've got some other Spanish goalkeepers. Oliver Kahn is not the only German goalkeeper that's coming through at this time. Quite honestly, some of the goalkeepers that were being produced in Europe at the time, and even in South America, was ridiculous. There were some great Argentinian goalkeepers. Absolutely ridiculous. The quality of goalkeepers at that time. Absolutely ridiculous what was coming through. There is no denying that. Chilavert was like a poor man's René Higuita from Paraguay, and he was a brilliant goalkeeper. And Canizares, I think, there were players, goalies coming through in the 90s and into the early 2000s that are far superior than many we have now. And people go on about, Manuel Neuer. He's overrated. He gets away with it because the team in front of him. He won't be getting away with it for much longer. Trust me. He does make a lot of errors. He just gets away with it because the team in front of him scored 5 or 6 goals. It's the only goal he concedes in the game. Trust me. But no, there was a lot of great goalkeepers coming through at the time and playing. And I think the quality of goalkeeper was also higher in the 90s and the 2000s than it is now. Oh yeah, when he was at Schalke and even at Bayern, he's made just a hatful. Neuer has made a hatful at both Schalke and Bayern. That clearance where he runs out and heads the ball, and it goes straight to Stankovic and he volleys it from like the halfway line. That's not a great save by Neuer because he's put it straight into his off his line and he's given it to the opposition player, regardless of who it is. And people go, "That's a great save by Neuer." They're 1-0 down. He's cost his side the game. Instead of chesting it, which he's very good at, by the way, or heading it down, he's decided to go for this big, long, looping header straight into the centre of midfield where there's an unmarked player who's just going to go, "Oh, there's a half volley. I can just put my laces through that," which he does, and he scores. Neuer makes loads. He's a very athletic goalkeeper, don't get me wrong. And he's very, very good. He is world class for some of the saves he's pulled off. He's a modern day René Higuita. I wouldn't be surprised if Neuer tries to do a scorpion kick. he is very athletic. He is very flexible. He is very mobile. But I wouldn't say he's the world's best goalie. I think for a couple of years, I think he was, yes. Yeah, when he was at Schalke and his early days at Bayern, you could argue Manuel Neuer was possibly the best goalkeeper in the world. Um, but no, he's calamitous. He just gets away with it because the team in front of him has just pumped in 7 goals against Brazil, for example, um, or Bayern, dominating their league position. So you could argue that, but no, he's not the best goalkeeper because he's too impetuous. He will run out like that, and he will try and do the sweeper keeper. And okay, he gets away with it. Let's say for Germany, does he? Because last World Cup, Germany were woeful, and you could argue that while Neuer is possibly one of the most consistent goalies for like he will pull off saves he has no business making, much like Courtois in the Champions League final. There's only so long you can do that before you are facing a firing squad and mistakes will happen. And we can debate the pros and cons of Manuel Neuer and how good he is. But normally goalies peak later in their careers. I think Neuer peaked earlier in his career, which is unusual for a goalie. They normally peak in their mid-30s. He peaks in his mid-20s, which for me is a worrying sign if you're looking at a game and your goalie, who generally they get better with age and they peak in about the age of 33 to 35. He peaked when he was 25. And for me, that's a worry. Shay Given, yes, and Steve Harper as well. He's understudy, and then the future number one, his replacement at Newcastle, in the sense as the number one. Yes, Shay Given and Steve Harper, his replacement. They look very similar as well. They're almost clones. Shay Given and Steve Harper, good goalie duo, absolutely brilliant goalkeepers. Tim Krul, I think, is an underrated goalkeeper as well. Uh, there are some good goalies out there. And there's some iconic goalies like Gabor Kirai, famous at Crystal Palace for his baggy trousers and the Hungarian. He was a brilliant goalkeeper. And he's a cult figure. Absolute cult figure was Gabor Kirai. One of my favourite goalies. Because he was a bit of a mad hatter, but most goalies are insane. Yes, Tim Fowers. He was very good at Nottingham Forest, and he was very, very good at Blackburn. Obviously, a Premier League winner. Again, very criminally underrated. Partly because at the time he only had 4 England caps. At the time he was at the peak of his powers. You had David Seaman and Nigel Martin also at the peak of their powers, and of course, if you're an England coach, you're going to go with what do you go with? And David Seaman was a little bit more consistent, and obviously had that little bit more club success. Nigel Martin, criminally underrated, and Jaskalainen, great shot stopper, absolutely elastic. He was literally like an elastic band. He was brilliant. Ochoa from Mexico pulling off saves he had no business pulling off. I think he got back-to-back World Cups. Ochoa got save of the tournament, especially in 2014. I think some of the top 10 saves he had 3 of them. But Jaskalainen, another one. Carlo Nash, remember him from Man City? Criminal. He didn't really have a good run in the side though. Carlo Nash when he was at Man City. There just wasn't the. He was coming up against some very good keepers. So he didn't really get the chance he should have. You could argue that, yes. I think Hoddle with Martin and Seaman. Tim Flowers, underrated. But I think Tim Flowers can be very happy with his career and say, look, I'm a Premier League winner. I've got international caps. I'm happy with my career. And I think Tim Flowers is definitely one of the more underrated players. Nicky Weaver. I remember Carlo Nash's debut for Man City. Who was in goal that day? Got sent off. I think it might have been David Seaman actually. David Seaman or Peter Schmeichel was in goal for Man City. Yes, Peter Schmeichel played for both Manchester clubs. David Seaman ended up playing for Villa and Man City as well. Always an Arsenal player, I remember that. It was either Seaman or Schmeichel got sent off. Carlo Nash had to go in goal, and Man City lose the game. But Carlo Nash, what an underrated goalkeeper! What a name as well, Carlo Nash. Brilliant. It's a shame he didn't get a better run in the top flight with another club. But he bounced around, never re-established himself as a number one. Um, but there's been some good goalkeepers out there. Robinson, Ben Foster, Robinson scoring a goal against Foster. Um, and they were battling for the England number one jersey before the 2006 World Cup. He scores a goal against him in a league game. That was a funny one. Walker used to play for Leicester. He was England's number 3 for the 2002 World Cup. He was a very good goalkeeper. And we're just talking about England keepers. And the problem is we've never fully replaced Shilton, I don't believe, or even Gordon Banks. But Gordon Banks, Shilton, Seaman, and then who's the dominant keeper for a decade? Not just a tournament or two, a decade. Because Joe Hart's given it a go. Paul Robinson's given it a go. We obviously had David James. Calamity James, David James. David James. I met David James. He's a really nice guy, David James. Peter, that own goal, Peter Enkelman, Birmingham City versus Aston Villa. The throw in under his foot, Peter Enkelman. Oh, bless Peter, bless the Enk. I think he had a rough time at Aston Villa. Did Peter Enkelman? He didn't look happy there. I feel sorry for him. Sander Westerveld at Liverpool had his moments. Yurtsi Dudek. We're talking about players who played in the Premier League, but players who also played in Europe as well. Isaacson for Sweden. Who was the Danish keeper who played at Villa? Sorensen, who played for Villa. The younger Schmeichel, Kasper. There's a goalkeeper. Bradford, legend. Brad Friedel, Casey Keller, Tim Howard, Mark Schwarzer. We've had some good American and Australian goalkeepers as well. Let's not forget. No, Brad Friedel was world class. Very, very good keeper. Casey Keller, League Cup final. Blackburn, Tottenham, both goalkeepers were American. There you go. Friedel versus Keller. And that was also a battle for the number one jersey for the US for the World Cup that year. And they both went in the World Cup squad that year to Japan, Korea. There you go. There's the quality of goalkeepers in the 90s and the 2000s. Look how many we're reeling off. And a lot of them, yes, a lot of them did play in the Premier League. And a lot of them did play in Spain. A lot of them did play in Germany. And a lot of them played in Italy, like Morgan De Sanctis. You had Toldo, you had Cudicini, you had Lowe. Please don't remind me of Peter Enkelman, please. He didn't have a very happy stay in England. He wouldn't count it as his finest hour. But no, a lot of the Neil Sullivan, yeah. A lot of the players we're bringing up and mentioning, who played especially goalkeepers who played in the 90s and the 2000s. And this is where England, I think, had a problem: is so many foreign keepers in the later 90s and early 2000s flooded over here, which impacted. Which impacted the ability to go. Well, we're stuck with Seaman and Nigel Martin then, because Tim Flowers is now retired, and that was the problem. That's why I feel Paul Robinson, while he was good at Spurs and Blackburn, he was a brilliant goalkeeper, and I have a lot of time for Paul Robinson. He has had some serious health issues. Started out at Leeds, obviously, when Nigel Martin retired or moved on. Because of the influx of foreign keepers and the large amount of foreign keepers playing in the Premier League from the mid to late 90s till now, that's definitely had an impact on the quality of England goalkeepers. Mike Taylor, yes, Mike Taylor. He was what a goalie he was. Uh, Paul Jones for Wales, for Southampton. Um, but, but again, Paul Jones for Wales and Mike Taylor for Northern Ireland. They're still home nations players. Neil Sullivan for Wimbledon, still a home nations player. I'm talking about the overseas players playing not only in England but also in Wales and Scotland, impacting the ability for us to develop and get the top quality goalkeepers playing in the Premier League week in, week out that are available for selection. And that's a problem we're starting to address now. But for a good 10, 15 years, we were limited in the amount of English players, especially goalkeepers, we had available for selection, which meant we were, when David Seaman retired and Nigel Martin moved on from Leeds, I think he retired. He might have ended up playing in the Championship or became the Championship. Paul Robinson was the number one for a few years with David James. They were fighting for that position, and David James was number one in 2004. Paul Robinson was number one in 2006. Oh, Van der Hau. I remember Van der Hau at Man United. I had a poster of him as well. Raymond van der Hau. I've not heard that name since 1997. Hey, look, Mark Bosnich. There's a player we missed out. Bozo. Mark Bosnich. Chelsea, Man United, Aston Villa. Mark Bosnich. But again, we are going back to the 90s again, and and the influx of overseas goalkeepers into English football from the mid 90s Premier League era, so around 95, 96, 97 till now, it has had an impact on the ability of us not only to put goalies in net, but put a team on the field. And it's only been in the last, let's say, 5 years, we've started to increase the participation level on match days of English or British players when it comes to the percentage of players playing who are eligible to represent one of the four home nations. And I think that's had an impact on Scottish football. It's had an impact on Welsh football and Northern Ireland, but predominantly England. I've already mentioned Sander Westerveld for Liverpool. But you see what I'm getting at. While some of the goalies who played in the Premier League and the other European leagues have been absolutely lights out fantastic. And I still say Edward Mendy is criminally underrated at Chelsea. I think he's the better out of the two, apart from him or Kepa. I would go with Mendy personally at Chelsea. I've met David James, yes. I met him when he was goalie of the year in 1996. He was voted Young Player and Goalie of the Year at the PFA Awards. So I did meet David James, and he's a Paddy Kenny. Yes, there was some drugs with Paddy Kenny, though. Paddy Kenny did some things off the field that weren't the brightest, which damaged his reputation. There was allegations of drug and alcohol use with Paddy Kenny. I think steroids as well. I think with Paddy Kenny, good goalie. Chris Kirkland, another decent goalkeeper we've had. I feel like Mygan at Milan is ridiculously underrated. Well, Donnarumma obviously was at Milan last year, and now he's gone to PSG. And people bigging him up like, oh, he's going to be the future Buffon, the future Dino Zoff. He's going to be the next Toldo and all this, and the next big thing. And yeah, is it? Yeah, Marcus Hanneman. Ooh, yes. I've seen Marcus Hanneman play many times for Reading. Yeah. Again, American though. So while he was a brilliant keeper, so the club country debate, while Marcus Hanneman was a fantastic keeper at Reading in his time, they're fantastic. No doubt one of the cult heroes of the game, like Gabor Kirai. Not the tallest goalkeeper, but my God, he was fantastically athletic. Very much overlooked, Marcus Hanneman, but he's a cult hero. and he's on that level of Gabor Kirai where he's good. He's not world class, but it's it's the fact that he's a little bit mental, and he's not the tallest. Wayne Hennessy, I'm not a fan of Wayne Hennessy. I'm being polite. I felt yeah, Hanneman it was a poor man's Barthez. So was Gabor Kirai. They were a bit mental. All three of them were a bit mental. Just Barthez has got a World Cup and a Euros winners medal to his name. But no, Marcus Hanneman and Gabor Kirai are in the same sort of mould as Fabian Barthez. You're just not sure what crazy stunt they're going to pull off next. Because Gabor Kirai is obviously famous for his baggy trackies, and Marcus Hanneman, not being the tallest, was a bit weak when it came to crosses. So you're not quite sure what kind of calamity those three are going to give you, but they're all in the same sort of style. They all play the position the same way, and they were all playing against each other at the same time. Um, Philip, yes, yes. Who was the Romanian keeper that Man City had? Who was ridiculously tall. There was that stupidly tall Romanian goalie that Man City had a couple of seasons ago. He was like a billion foot tall. He was like 7 foot tall. Um, I don't know why we're talking about goalkeepers now. I could talk about NHL goalies and some of the insanity there with like Ron Hextall and Billy Smith and Ray Emery and how they would try and kill you if you got in their crease. But no, there's some mad goalkeepers. Um, you had Rushdu at Barcelona in Turkey. You had Rost for Hamburg in Germany. It was Pantilimon, that's the one. Gosh, little Pantilimon. One of the tallest goalkeepers, I think, bigger than Donnarumma. He's about 3, 4 inches taller than Donnarumma. He's massive. Gosh, still Pantilimon. Um, Absolute giant of a man. You had what was the Yugoslav goalie in 2000? And Kral, that was his name. He was actually a Montenegrin, Kral, who had 5 goals put past him by Holland in Euro 2000, including 3 by Patrick Kluivert. Um, you you had Abondanzeri for Argentina in 2006. Simon Mignolet, underrated. I think he had mistakes in his game and he was one of those confidence goalies, but Simon Mignolet, I felt sorry for him. In 2018, losing his place to Loris Karius, and then eventually Alison Becker. I did feel sorry for Simon Mignolet and Pepe Reina as well. Pepe Reina was a poor man's Barthez. Pepe Reina, he was a bit mad. I haven't even mentioned Pepe Reina yet. No, don't. I think we've been very, very lucky in the last 30 years with some of the goalkeepers that have graced not only the Premier League, but European football. So if you follow the Italian league, or you follow the Spanish league, or you follow the French league, or the German league, the Premier League, the other European leagues, we have been, I think, very, very lucky with not only the goalies you've been playing in the top flight leagues that will go on to play in the Europa League and Champions League and Europa Conference League and all that, but also the lower leagues as well. I think we've been spoiled a little bit, and some of them are, Manuel. I mean, Hilario, Kuszczak, yeah, another one. Um, Hilario for Chelsea. We've had obviously, we've had some really mental ones who've played the game. Who are, we have been blessed with entertainment and some very, very good goalkeepers who've, you know, I think that the standard of goalkeeping, but also, you know, every goalkeeper's got a mistake in them. Every goalkeeper's got a mistake in them, in my opinion, you know. But the standard and the competitiveness which leads to the mistakes because you're pushing yourself um, is, in my opinion, fantastic. I think we are in a golden age of goalkeepers. Um, Antti Niemi. I've met Antti Niemi. He's a nice chap actually. We've mentioned several Scandinavian goalkeepers, Denmark, Sweden, and Finland. Um, I'm trying to remember the Icelandic goalkeeper. Uh, he plays for who played for Iceland in the Euros and the World Cup, and we lost that game. We lost 2-1. He's actually he's a photographer by trade, by the way. He's only a part timer, and I say that with respect because he plays very well. Yeah, no, we've been graced over the last 2.5, 3 decades with some of the goalkeepers who've played the game. And look, we're talking about the players who played in the English league system. Haraldsson, that's it. He's similar to, I would say, Jussi Laskalainen in his style. But every goalkeeper, if you notice, has their own unique, like Bruce Grobbelaar, for example, and the Everton goalkeeper. Oh, it's going to annoy me now. The old Everton goalkeeper. He was Welsh. Oh, it's going to annoy me. That's going on. I've forgotten the guy's name now. But the every goalie is you. Yeah, Cudicini. Yep, very good off his line. Cudicini. Neville Southall. That's the one I met. Southall. I met Neville Southall and Bruce Grobbelaar were very similar, but slightly unique in their styles in the 80s and into the 90s. And then Tim Flowers was one of those goalies who would run off his line quite a bit. Seaman was a bit weak, I would think, on sometimes on crosses and lobs. He would sometimes come off his line and get caught, like Ronaldinho caught him, but he'd been caught out a few times before in a similar incidents. But he was also always a very aggressive goalkeeper in the sense that he would always be off his line quick. Um, whereas other goalies like Jussi Laskalainen were very good going side to side as well as coming off their line because he had that extra bit of height. Adrian and Manuel Almunia. Almunia was really underrated. Yes, he had mistakes in his game, but you would never. Richard Wright, Ipswich, famous at Ipswich, that toothless grin. A big part of why Ipswich got promoted, a big part of why Ipswich finished fifth in their first season in the Premier League. Massive reason for that. But yeah, there's been some. Look how many goalies we've mentioned. So many. Um, it was Chris. Was it Chris Walker or Tim Walker who played for Leicester? It's going to annoy me now. That is going to bug me now. But Richard Wright, yep. Arsenal and Ipswich. Fantastic player. Absolutely, in my opinion, a very underrated goalie. Rob Green. He obviously had his ups and downs. You had Scott Carson. And that's when we were going through Chris Kirkland. That's when we were struggling to find a number one in that period. Post Paul Robinson. We mentioned Tim Flowers like 5 times now. But with Rob Green and then that period and Ben Foster and Fraser Forster for a little bit, we still haven't Dida yet. Dida was a good goalie. That instant with the flare that goes down his back with the Inter AC riot, and that was nasty. Nigel, yeah, we mentioned Nigel Martin a few times. I think he was the first goalie worth £1 million in English football. He was known as the £1 million goalkeeper earlier in his career, before the Premier League. I think he went to Palace. He went before he was at Leeds. He was at Crystal Palace, and he went for he forget where he was playing before Palace, but he was called the £1 million goalkeeper. He was the first goalkeeper in English football. Casillas. Casillas, brilliant shot stopper. Brilliant shot stopper, Iker Casillas. But you had Canizares. He was battling for that number one spot for Spain. But Iker Casillas, when he burst onto the scene, I think he was 18 or 19. He was already Real Madrid's number one. Yurtsi Dudek was his backup. Ridiculous. Yeah, yeah. Oliver Kahn and Jens Lehmann, um, Van der Sar. Um, the list goes on with what I would call world class goal. I mean, look how many we've named. I mean, I think every single one of them at some point has had at least one cap for their country, um, and some of them are actually number ones. So there you go. I don't think there's a goalie on that list that hasn't had at least one cap at age grade or as out and out senior level. Oh, Coupe. Barthez backup at two World Cups. Didn't quite get the run on the French side I think he deserved because of Barthez. Didn't quite get that run in the French side. We mentioned Neville Southall, former Wales number one and Everton number one. But you look at the names we mentioned, and some of them weren't even the first choice for their country, like Tim Flowers and Coupe for a period, Nigel Martin, Chris Kirkland, Richard Wright, Kudashini, Kuszczak. But they've all they've all won something. They've all been in finals. They played in the Champions League or Cup Winners' Cup or UEFA Cup, Europa League. Or they've all at some Victor Valdez. But you look at the period they're playing when they either make their debut or at the peak of their career is between the late 80s and the mid 2000s. So when I say the best period of football is 94 to 2008, every single one of those players we have mentioned has played at some point, either ending their careers in the early 90s or is at the peak of their powers in the middle of that period. So there you go. Are we talking about any current goalkeepers right now? Casillas, technically with his heart and Porto, he's still on the books. But are we actually talking about any current players right now? No. Apart from Haraldsson and Thomas Kuszczak and technically Casillas, we're not talking about any current goalkeepers. All of them are retired, apart from I think 3 that have been mentioned. So what does that tell you? We mentioned Manuel Neuer, but look at that list. Look at the list of names we brought up in the last half hour. 3 or 4 are still actively, technically playing. Shaka Hislop. Yeah, Shaka. I've met Shaka Hislop as well. There's a few on this list I actually have met. I'm trying to remember who was. David James was the goalie. Who was the goalie for Sheffield Wednesday in '96? I'm going to have to research the Sheffield Wednesday squad for '96 because they had a very good goalkeeper. It bugs me who it is. I've met him and it's going to piss me off. He's not a household name, though. He's a very good goalie. Edison. Again, very few of the names that are coming up are currently still playing. Jamie Ashton. Now we're going back some. Jamie Ashton. But you look at the names that are coming up. Kevin Pressman. Why is that being held? I want to know why that's being held for review. That's really bizarre. There's nothing offensive about Kevin Pressman's name, but it's held for review for some reason. How bizarre. But no, you're looking at the names of the goalkeepers, and most of them that we are talking about are from the 90s and the 2000s. See, you look at the names that are coming up, whether they played in the Premier League or the old Division One with Neville Southall, for example, or in Europe, they're all, for the most part, and I'm being fair, for the most part, 90s and 2000s, maybe late 80s at a push. But at some point they played in a period, as I say. Yes, I met Kevin Pressman as well. Nicky Weaver, yeah, he did replace Tim Flowers when he went to Blackburn. Yes. But you see what I'm getting at here is most of the goalies we are talking about. I say this with football in general, played part of, if not all of their careers between '94 and 2008. and that's my personal opinion, is I believe football was at its best in that period. But then you can also look at the correlation of goal scoring going down at the start of that period and slowly. We mentioned both Schmeichel's father and son. We notice that goal scoring goes down in the World Cups, at least, in the finals in 90 and 94, and then slowly goes back up again, but has not reached the levels of the 70s and 80s. And again, there was two finals where there's 5 goals scored. We are not. Something has happened, and it's partly to do with the quality of. We mentioned Maldini as a defender. Quality of defending goes up. What I call the trap tactics, the Trapattoni trap. There's a word for it, and there's an Italian slang word for Trapattoni's sort of style of football. Other teams adopt that in a variant, and what comes out of the Italian defensive style of the early 90s is the Spanish tiki-taki. Okay, then, if you're not going to let us score many goals, we'll make you run around a lot and we'll score 1 or 2 goals. So the attacking style changes. So the Italian defence meets Spanish tiki-taki. Combine that together, you might as well. And that puts some fans off. They want to see fast-paced goal scoring. They want to see open-ended, end-to-end, high press. We haven't really had that just before and just after the period I'm talking about. So the period where I think football's at its best is 94 to 2008. Before that period, it's the Italian defensive style that wins out. Just after that period, it's the tiki-taki that wins out. But in the middle of that period, it's entertainment galore. You're not bored. Oh my, yeah, we've mentioned some of the names have been mentioned more than once, like Van der Sar, Friedel, Schwarzer, Cech. Now, I'm surprised it's taken this long for Petr Cech's name to come up. But absolutely, he starts his career in the period that I'm talking about. He only recently retired. Yep, Zenga. Lesser known, Walter Zenga. He's not as well known as some on the list. You have to be of a certain age and remember that tournament. But this is what the point I'm getting at. Most of the names of the keepers we've mentioned are playing in the period at some point, either for all of that period between 94 and 2008, or part of the period where the game is at its best. So the quality of all positions has gone through the roof. And then I do believe quality did lag. And I think football as a sport was at a transition period when pay starts exploding rapidly in the early 90s. The game becomes even more global because the US has now got the 94 World Cup. And we're at that crossroads. I've mentioned Tim Howard. We mentioned Tim Howard in a whole list of American goalkeepers. But there you go. You see, Ricardo, God, now we really are going. What, Ricardo? Another goalie who was a bit mental. He said in a press conference once, God has given me the power to save penalties. I was sent here by down from God to save penalties. He famously said that in a press conference. I think it was either 2004 or 2006. Past World Cups. I think Pele's record of playing 58, 62, 66, 70, playing in 3 World Cup finals and playing in 4 consecutive World Cups, I don't think gets broken. I don't think Jairzinho's record of scoring at every goal at a finals gets surpassed. What other random records are there? There's some really. I don't think Italy's record of not conceding a goal from open play at a major finals happens again. Because technically, in 2006, corner own goal and a penalty. So not conceding a goal from open play. And not conceding a single. Oh no, they did concede in the final. They did concede a goal, but it was a penalty. I don't. What was that semi? What was there was a knockout game where it was not a single shot on goal in 120 minutes. It was 0-0, and Switzerland were one of the sides that played. They went to a penalty shootout, but that's nothing. Dino Zotta, oh my God, there are other sports in the world we could discuss. I mean, look, I'm wearing an NFL shirt for crying out loud. We could discuss other stuff, but we're discussing, uh, football in the last 30. Dino's off. I mean, look, Dino's off dominated not only the international side selection, but his club side as well. I think in his career, he missed about, what, 20 games he could have played or something. Um, he played pretty much consistently for the best part of 22, 23 years. Somewhere I've got a program from 1977. Uh, um, we mentioned Grobbelaar. But Grobbelaar, unfortunately, his reputation is tainted by the match fixing and the bribery allegations, and he did admit that he did take backhanders. Um, Bruce Grobbelaar, unfortunately, and I will say this, I'm not a Liverpool fan by any stretch of the imagination, but Bruce Grobbelaar, his reputation is tarnished by the allegations of corruption, and he hasn't really sold. They don't go away. And he did say that I had taken, dodgy envelopes to give people information to do stuff, betting or so there's a bit of a grey area with Bruce Grobbelaar and the corruption allegations, that he is alleged to have either fixed matches or allowed soft goals or something like that. Um, he's not the only player to have that in any sport, because we've seen it in obviously cricket and rugby league, ice hockey, baseball, every sport you can think of. There's at least one player or official that's had that. But Bruce Grobbelaar, um, for all the brilliance of all his for all Bruce Grobbelaar's brilliance in net with the wobbly knees against Roma and everything that he did in the game, unfortunately, apart from that shootout against Roma, unfortunately, a lot of people remember him for the match fixing allegations. Yes, and that still sticks with him. He can't get away from that, and until he fully comes clean about what actually happened, I think it's more spot fixing than match fixing. I think he let in some soft goals, maybe, or gave betting information of this player's not going to be playing because he's not fully fit, or he's only going to play 60 minutes and then we're going to sub him. That kind of thing. But there were allegations against him, and he didn't really cover himself in glory by some of his, statements he gave to the press and the investigators. And so, I mean, I could look it up now. I mean, he's not the only sports star. Like the Hansi Cronje back in the cricket, back in '98 when he lied to the South African Parliament saying he'd never been involved with match fixing. Yet he was on tape in an undercover police sting for a separate thing entirely, in regards to taking bribes to fix matches. You couldn't make that one up. And then, of course, his suspicious end in 2000. Let's have a look at what actually happened. So he played for a very long time. 81, he made his debut for Liverpool. He played till 94. So that's a fair long time. But he didn't just play for Liverpool. He also played for Stoke City and Southampton, and Plymouth Argyle and Oxford United, and Oldham, and Bury, and Lincoln City. He's played for a few other clubs other than Liverpool. He's obviously famous for his time at Liverpool, where he played 440 times. But he played 2 seasons at Southampton and a season at Plymouth Argyle, and then a period of time for Oxford, Sheffield Wednesday, before ending his professional career at Lincoln. There you go. Right, let's have a look at the match fixing allegations. So on the 10th of November '94, so near the end of his career now, I'll get to the question about how I consider sports journalism. Grobbelaar was accused by the British tabloid newspaper The Sun, and that's never a good thing when it comes to Liverpool and the press, of match fixing during his time at Liverpool to benefit a betting syndicate after being caught on tape, video that is. That's how long ago this was. Being caught on video discussing match fixing. He was charged with conspiracy to corrupt, along with Seegers of Villa and Fashanu, the crazy gang Fashanu of Wimbledon, as players, with a Malaysian businessman called Heng Swan Lim. Now, John Fashanu ended up retiring from football and presenting gladiators on TV. Hans Sagers didn't really have the most glorious career. I don't remember Hans Sagers very well, but I think he did win the League Cup with Villa. And so, but basically, I know it was Fashion didn't really have a great time at Villa. Sagers didn't really have a great time at Wimbledon. So basically, members of the crazy gang and good old Grobbelaar. Despite these allegations, Grobbelaar and Seegers were allowed to continue playing while Fashion retired from playing less than a year after being charged. So he went on to present gladiators. Grobbelaar pleaded not guilty, claiming he was only gathering evidence with the intent of taking it to the police, which is where people go, really? After two successive trials, in both of which the jury could not agree on a verdict, he and his co-defendants were cleared in '97. So it took 3 years. Grobbelaar later sued the Sun for libel and was awarded 85 grand. The Sun appealed, and the case was eventually taken to the House of Lords, where it was found that though specific allegations had not been proved, there was adequate evidence of dishonesty. In the end, he ended up getting awarded a quid. There you go. The lowest libel damage possible under English law at the time. And he had to pay the Sun's legal costs, which were $500,000. So in reality, he didn't make any money. Grobbelaar was unable to pay the costs and was declared bankrupt. He and Seegers did not retire from playing until sometime after being cleared of their involvement in the alleged match fixing, which is why Grobbelaar played for some crap teams in the lower divisions, because he had no money. So there we go. Yeah, let's have a look at Hans Seegers, because Hans Seegers didn't really. Hans Seegers played for Eindhoven and Forest. That was a half decent keeper. Then he played for Stoke, then Sheffield United online, and then Dunfermline. Then he goes to Wimbledon the season after they win the FA Cup. So he's still part of the crazy gang. And during this whole scandal, he ended up playing for Wolves, Woking, Wolves again, and Spurs. So his career, basically, Grobbelaar and Seegers' careers go down the toilet after these match fixing allegations. Fashanu, within a year, he's retired, and his brother's sadly, taken his own life, which is obviously very, very sad. But what is interesting is as soon as these allegations come out, within a year, Fashanu's done. Seegers and Grobbelaar, their careers go down the toilet, even though goalkeepers at that point in their careers generally are pretty solid players and actually are at their peak. So that is very, very interesting. And the statement that Grobbelaar gave out was like, "Oh yeah, I was trying to help you." Yeah, it didn't wash with the public, but the Sun and Liverpool, the city of Liverpool in general, don't like it. I mean, the city of Liverpool is not fans of the Murdoch media, and the Sun as a publication, and so there was a sort of, well, they're trying to smear us again. So a lot of Liverpool fans and Everton and Tranmere fans from Merseyside were like, "Oh, it's the Sun, they're at it again." This is a sustained campaign to smear the city and the clubs that play there for whatever reason. And unfortunately, the rest of the country declared Fashanu, Seegers, and Grobbelaar guilty of what was never actually proven in court. But the libel trial, the way he sues them for libel, he ends up being made bankrupt because of it. Makes you want to ask the question: hang on a second, if he's run out of money, maybe there's some truth to these allegations. So no, it wasn't all because of Hillsborough. It was already Hazel. What you're after. The Hazel disaster was in '85, which was a few years before. And so Liverpool were already in the bad books with the British press because they had shamed us overseas. But what is interesting, when it all goes to court, the lawsuit, not the criminal case, the civil case, and the News International, which owned the Sun, appealed and sort of won the appeal and had to pay their compensation less. It turned out that Robillard was bankrupt, which does beg the question, hang on a second, maybe there is some truth to these allegations that he is taking backhanders to, you know, fiddle, spot fix, or match fix, which are two different things. Because spot fix, you just go, "I'll let it a soft goal." Match fix is, we'll make sure we lose 3-1, and all the goals happen in the last 10 minutes. We're 1-0 up and we suddenly lose 3-1. That's a match fix. Spot fix is, I'll let in a soft goal in 20 minutes. Oh, I've let in the soft goal. Right now, I'm going to play well again. That's the spot fix. But yeah, if it was any other newspaper, I think the reaction would have been more united in, yeah. And even today, my mum, bearing in mind my mum was married to a Liverpool fan, and her father-in-law, my late grandfather, was a Scouser and a die-hard Liverpool fan. Even now, my mum goes guilty as hell. And I actually remember my dad and my granddad being very, not embarrassed, but there was a sense of shame around it, and because they were hardcore Liverpool fans. These guys were so passionate; it was unreal. Um, they, to their dying days, were like the Robillard situation brought a lot of shame to them as fans of the club, and I think deep down they knew it to be a grain of truth to it, more truth than not truth, so to speak. But there were only allegations; they weren't proven in court. But it's a civil case, which I think to me suggests possibly, because it wasn't, it was a divided jury in the fraud allegations and the corruption allegations. There was enough evidence that on another day that jury finds him guilty in the initial criminal trial. So yeah, have I ever thought about a sports journalism course? I'm not very good at, well, see my notebook. I mean, I don't like writing for long periods of time, which is partly due to my ADHD. But yes, while my writing is obviously exceptionally neat and tidy, and I do take a lot of notes. Um, especially when I'm doing research on you know, certain things, like that's the notes on Mark Noble's career, for example. And then you've got Challenge Cup final. That's when I do a match review. Challenge Cup final. The history videos of the club. While I definitely enjoy what I do now, there is a lot of writing involved to be a journalist. A hell of a lot of writing, and I'm not very good at writing lengthy essays. I'm good at note taking, and I'm very, very good at obviously speaking and using my notes, for example, to go, okay, Port Vale, Sunderland, founded here, good seasons, bad seasons, the trophies one I can break down like that. But to write lengthy essays, I always struggled at school. I always struggled in class with like timed essays and stuff, and I get frustrated, and I'm not great at spelling, if I'm honest, and you've got to be able to do a lot of writing to be a journalist, and writing for lengthy spells, I'm not good at, and therefore, while I would love to be, I don't know how to put it. Well, I would love to be like, on the radio. Radio, I think, would be brilliant for me. Or, and I've been told I could be a commentator because I've got a voice for commentary, but not necessarily a face for TV. I think is what my mum said to me once. I think that was tongue in cheek because when I initially started this channel, I was really nervous and I wasn't as clear and as articulate as I am now. And I can go off topic. I think you guys have noticed that. It took me a while to actually go back to the sports journalism question, for example. And while I've considered it, because I would have to go back as a mature student, I would have to pay, and I just don't have the money. That's one thing that's always put me off, is that student debt and not being able to afford my course. and it's also, I know that I'm going to struggle with the amount of writing you've got to put in, and I'm not very good at that. And I we'll see. If let's say the channel does hit 1,000 subscribers, gets monetized, and you know, a website or a broadcaster, because I had Sky at one point. I did, yeah, about 4 or 5 years ago. A Sky Sports, I think HR person um, came along and emailed me and said, "Look, we would like to have a chat with you about, podcast." I think it was about a podcast. I think they wanted me to do a podcast where once a week I would have a um, ex-player or an ex-player come on of a variety of different sports and uh, discuss some of the sports headlines. And I was like, "Nah, fuck off." Because I've made it very, very clear that I'm not a fan of putting sport behind a paywall. I'm not a fan of restricting access. I believe free-to-air access should be in parallel with subscription services. I'm not a fan of the way we're pricing out fans. There we go. But if let's say an independent website, like the Athletic, I like the Athletic, I do. If someone like that was to come along and say, "Look, we want to do a video podcast series. We like your content. We want you to sit down and do like a podcast type of thing once or twice a week with, um, ex players or things like that." Then yeah, I'm more than happy to sit down and be more like that sports fan. Um, and that's a different kettle of fish. But some of the big mainstream media, I'm not a fan of some of their actions that they've taken and some of the decisions they've taken, and I'm highly critical of BT Sport and Sky Sports. Um, so yeah, the most obviously fixed game. Yeah, I remember that. I might have still been at school, but I do remember that game. And even though Italians have had their own match fixing scandals, you could definitely see on their frustration with how the game was going, and their frustration with a lot of the decisions were plain obvious to us that wasn't right. A lot of what I do know about what's come up, because Der Spiegel's quite a good publication, and they do have a very good English version. Same with the Gazzetta dello Sport. Der Spiegel is a German newspaper, and they're very, very good with investigative journalism. And they've invested what they call the we had the Panama Papers. We now had the football leagues, basically. And Der Spiegel has done some digging. And there's around, at one point, there was between 500 to 700 games actively under investigation in the period of 1998 till I think it was like 2018 at the time. So in the build up to the World Cup in Russia. And I think 500 of them were European and domestic league games. And the other 200 were internationals, including World Cups and Euros. Um, and Der Spiegel, I have a lot of time for their independent, non-biased, unbiased reporting, because there is no political agenda of right or left. It is, this is what's going on. This is what we found out. Bosh. You know, so that's how we know Man City are under investigation again. That's how we know they were under investigation with PSG and AC Milan in the first place. Before UEFA even said we are investigating these clubs for financial fair play and other financial rule breaches and breaches of the youth transfer policy with Chelsea as well, they were already investigating that, because the Spiegel, in my opinion, and the Gazzetta dello Sport with some of their reporting as well, when the Calciopoli scandal of or Calciopolo scandal of 2006. There was rumblings going on as far back as 2002, 2003, 2004, into 2005. When they broke that, the Italian FA were already investigating alongside UEFA with their anti-corruption unit. And when that actually came to light, that shattered absolutely shattered the Italian fan base, stunned, stunned Italian average fans, not your hard, not the pundits and the ex players, your casual fan, stunned them, and it it highlighted a lot of things that people knew within the game for a very long time, but there was that culture of silence. And then we've had it with the English football corruption scandals, with Mike Newell famously mentioned the bungs and the dodgy agents and dodgy dealings. And a few years later, Sam Allardyce does his stupid thing, which gets caught by the Daily. I think it was either Telegraph or the Guardian, very similar to Bruce Grobbelaar, caught on tape discussing how to basically be a crook, basically, and get round rules. And very similar to what Mike Newell was saying a decade before. This is going on. I've had enough of it. Da, 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 da. And there you go. So, and then we've had the German match fixing scandal where the referee was actually found to have participated. And he got a 6-month sentence or something, and he's still allowed to referee, which I find ridiculous. The Turkish scandal, the Greek scandal. So it's definitely something that, as there's more money in the game, and the game is worth worth a lot of value now economically. The more money that's pumped into the system with weak regulation and weak governance, what's the result? Ask local clubs that need commentators for YouTube. Again, it's I have a full-time job and I would need this channel to be self-sufficient. And that is the problem. Is I need the self-sufficiency of the channel for me to go. I don't have to do my day job anymore, and I can be a bit more flexible. I was also offered a collaboration with a rugby league publication, but the problem is they wanted me to like go up and interview players. Apart from the London Broncos and possibly the London Scholars, most of the teams are in the north of England, and I live in the south. And I said, look, I don't drive. I have a little 125 motorcycle. I live in the southeast, and I have a full-time job, and I live by myself. And I basically said, well, I would have loved the opportunity. It's not feasible and it's not practical. And yes, we can do the video interviews now in Zoom and things like that. So it's not practical. So I've had a couple of offers to collaborate, and I've turned them down. And I think that the one with the rugby league one is for the right reasons. The Sky Sports one, maybe I shouldn't have. But then if they actually were to watch my content, I am so critical and so. I don't bash Sky all the time, but I've been heavily critical of their business model. That it would make no sense for me to work for them when I've been basically slagging them off for the best part of 5 years. And I do have my principles and I do stand by my guns. So if, let's say, Joe.com was to come along or The Athletic, that's different. That's different. If they were to come along and go, we want to, work with you to, collaborate and maybe have you, work for us, that's different because I like the Athletic. I've read some of the Athletics articles. I've watched, some of their podcast things that they sponsor and they work with. Same with Barstool Sports. I have some criticisms of Barstool Sports, but I like the Spitting Chicklets podcast. I like some of the stuff that Barstool Sports have done, but at the same time, I can be critical of some of the things that have happened with Barstool Sports over many years. Something may come up, something may not. It might be that one video where someone goes, "What?" and it may happen. But I have to admit, I have been highly critical of many of them. Even the BBC and ITV, I've been critical of them, and I stand by my criticism. Now, as I say, I'm not always an expert on everything, and I'm not always 100% knowledgeable in everything, and I don't know the ins and outs of every single player's contract or transfer dealing. And this is where I think, not only just for casual fans, but for sport itself, there needs to be more transparency. and there needs to be simplification of player contracts and transfers or trades for that matter. Um, you know, the financial side of things. I think there needs to be independent auditors every year. We know that sports teams have been cooking the books and lying about their financial state, hence why the chaos of 2020 till now with the European Super League and the massive losses clubs have made. Um, and I think the TV deal definitely needs a bit more transparency as well, and the media negotiations. So there we go. But I'm not a financial expert. I'm not a businessman. I'm just a fan with a passion. But there we go. Thank you very much for watching. I'm going to call it a night because it's now midnight, and I think it's time we all went to bed. And I will have some more content for you guys very, very soon.